Dad opened the door. On a freezing Christmas Eve in Chicago, I stood trembling on my father's porch, clutching my soaking wet 1-year-old daughter Lily to my chest. "He brought his mistress home," I whispered, as the brutal blizzard howled around us, whipping snow into our faces. His mother packed up our things, threw the two of us out into the freezing cold, and locked the door. My father William looked at his little granddaughter shivering uncontrollably from the plunging temperatures. He tightened his grip on the heavy ring of keys in his hand, his eyes turning to absolute ice. "They picked the wrong family," he said. "My name is Clara, and I am 33 years old. Until that terrible freezing night, I thought I had a marriage built on partnership, mutual respect, and unwavering trust. If you are watching this from somewhere where family betrayal hits close to home, let me know in the comments where you are watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe to see exactly how a silent accountant completely dismantled an entire fake empire. Exactly 2 hours before standing on that freezing porch, my life had seemed perfectly normal. I was driving home through the heavy Chicago snowstorm with the heater blasting in my car, feeling exhausted but deeply happy. I had just spent the last 3 hours battling horrible holiday traffic to secure the final Christmas presents for my family. In the back seat, little Lily was fast asleep, her tiny chest rising and falling in a peaceful rhythm. I was completely focused on getting back to our beautiful 3-story brick home in Lincoln Park. Harrison, my husband of 5 years, had texted me earlier saying he was finishing up some important work in his home office. His mother Agnes had flown in for the holidays and was supposedly baking cookies in the kitchen. When I pulled into the driveway, the property looked exactly like a picturesque holiday greeting card. Fresh snow dusted the roof, and warm, golden light spilled from the large bay windows onto the front lawn. I carefully unbuckled Lily, wrapping her in a thick woolen blanket to protect her from the biting winter wind. Balancing my sleeping daughter on one hip and carrying 2 heavy shopping bags with my free hand, I made my way up the icy front steps. I unlocked the heavy oak door, trying to be as quiet as possible so I would not wake the baby. The moment I stepped into the grand foyer, the beautiful illusion of my perfect family life shattered into a million jagged pieces. There was no smell of baking cookies. Instead, the air was thick with the scent of an expensive, heavy floral perfume that I definitely did not own. The sprawling living room was illuminated only by the soft glow of the fireplace and the twinkling lights of our 12-foot Christmas tree. I dropped my keys on the console table, and the sharp metal clatter echoed loudly through the silent house. That was when I saw them. Harrison, my husband, the man I had faithfully supported through years of severe financial struggles, was aggressively kissing a young blonde woman right on our custom leather sofa. She had her arms wrapped tightly around his neck, and her long legs were draped possessively over his lap. I recognized her immediately. It was Brittany, a 26-year-old junior marketing assistant from his corporate office. Harrison had always described her as a clueless intern who constantly needed his professional mentorship. Clearly, his mentorship extended far beyond office hours and professional boundaries. My breath caught painfully in my throat. I stood absolutely frozen in the entryway, clutching my sleeping child tightly against my winter coat. I tried to speak, but my voice completely failed me. My mind desperately tried to process the impossible and disgusting scene playing out in my own living room on Christmas Eve. But the most disturbing part of the scene was not my husband intimately entangled with his subordinate. The most sickening detail was sitting just 10 feet away, in the oversized velvet armchair by the fire. Agnes. My mother-in-law was calmly sipping a glass of my expensive red wine. She was not shocked by the infidelity. She was not yelling at her son to stop ruining his marriage. She was simply watching them with a pleased, satisfied smile on her face, like she was observing a romantic movie theater screen. "What is going on here?" I finally managed to say. My voice cracked loudly, breaking the heavy silence and startling Lily, who began to fuss and cry against my shoulder. Harrison jumped up from the sofa, hastily straightening his wrinkled dress shirt. He did not look ashamed or guilty. He did not rush forward to apologize or beg for my forgiveness. Instead, he let out an annoyed scoff. and ran a hand through his hair, looking at me as if I was the one rudely intruding on his private moment. Brittany simply adjusted her tight dress and offered me a smug, unapologetic smirk before casually picking up her champagne glass from the glass coffee table. Agnes slowly set her wine glass down and stood up, smoothing her designer skirt with deliberate slowness. She walked toward me with a cold, calculating expression that sent chills down my spine. There was no warmth in her eyes, only a deeply rooted disdain that she was finally allowing to fully surface. "You are home early," Clara Agnes said, her tone flat and completely devoid of any human empathy. "We were not expecting you to return for another hour." "That is your explanation," I demanded, holding Lily tighter as the baby began to cry. "Your son is kissing his assistant in our living room, and you are sitting there drinking wine." Agnes crossed her arms defensively. "You need to face reality," Clara Agnes stated, her tone flat and completely devoid of any human empathy. "Harrison is about to be named Chief Executive Officer. He is entering an elite echelon of corporate power. He needs a woman who matches his elevated status. A trophy wife like Brittany, who can host galas and impress the board. Not a boring, low-level accounting clerk who spends her days staring at spreadsheets." I stared at her, feeling the blood drain completely from my face. I turned my desperate gaze to Harrison, expecting him to defend me, to shut down his mother's horrific insults. But he just stood there, silently avoiding my eyes and quietly nodding in agreement with her vicious words. Before I could fully process his silent betrayal, Agnes marched toward the hallway closet. She threw open the doors and aggressively yanked out my large black winter suitcase. It was already hastily packed with a random assortment of my clothes. She dragged it across the polished hardwood floor, opened the front door, and threw it directly into the howling blizzard. The suitcase landed in a snowbank with a heavy thud. Harrison stepped forward, but not to stop his mother. He looked at his watch and glared at me with absolute contempt. "You have exactly 10 minutes to take Lily and leave my house," he demanded, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "I want you gone before my guests arrive for our holiday dinner. Brittany and I have a lot of preparing to do, and your presence is ruining the atmosphere." "My house," I fired back, my shock rapidly shifting into a burning, desperate anger. "I paid the down payment for this house, Harrison. I spent the first 5 years of our marriage working 70-hour weeks to clear your massive credit card debts and that disastrous business loan you defaulted on. I put my own career on the back burner so we could afford to start a family. You had a negative credit score and zero savings when I married you. Every single luxury in this room exists because I funded your survival while you were pretending to be a successful entrepreneur." Brittany let out a high-pitched, mocking laugh from the sofa. She picked up my favorite ceramic coffee mug, the one I drank from every morning, and took a slow sip of her champagne. "God, Harrison, you were right," she giggled, twisting a strand of blonde hair around her manicured finger. "Your wife really is completely delusional. It is honestly embarrassing how desperately she clings to the past. You are the one making the big moves now, babe. She is just dead weight." Harrison smirked, wrapping his arm around Brittany's waist and pulling her close. "See, Clara, this is exactly why this marriage is over," he stated coldly. "You drag me down with your constant negativity and your boring, mundane mindset. Now get out before I call the police and have you removed for trespassing." I stood my ground, tightening my grip on Lily, who was now sobbing loudly against my neck, terrified by the screaming. "I am not leaving my home in the middle of a blizzard," I stated firmly. "I have a baby. You cannot legally throw us out into freezing temperatures on Christmas Eve." Agnes did not hesitate. She lunged forward with surprising speed and strength for a woman her age. She grabbed my upper arm, her fingernails digging painfully into my skin through my thick winter coat. She shoved me backward toward the open front door. I stumbled, my boots slipping on the snow-covered threshold. I had to twist my body dangerously to protect Lily from the impact of the fall. The freezing winter wind hit me like a physical blow, instantly biting through my clothes. "Do not ever come back!" Agnes screamed over the howling wind. Her face was twisted with pure malice. "You are nothing to this family anymore." She slammed the heavy oak door shut right in my face. The loud mechanical click of the deadbolt locking echoed loudly over the sound of the storm. I stood on the icy porch, completely stunned. The temperature was 10 degrees below zero. The snow was falling so thick and fast I could barely see the streetlights at the end of the driveway. Lily was crying uncontrollably, her tiny face turning red from the harsh cold. I had no car keys because they were still sitting on the console table inside the locked house. I had no credit cards in my coat pocket. I had nothing but my weeping daughter and a hastily packed suitcase half buried in the snow. Survival instinct kicked in, overriding my shock and devastation. My father's house was about 6 blocks away in a neighboring affluent subdivision. It was a brutal, dangerous walk in a blizzard, but I had absolutely no other choice. I abandoned the heavy suitcase on the snowy porch, wrapping my coat tightly around Lily to shield her from the biting wind. I began to trudge through the deep snow, every step a monumental effort against the freezing gale. The walk felt like an eternity. My legs grew numb, and my lungs burned with every breath of the icy air. The snow was piling up against my boots, soaking through the leather and freezing my toes. My tears froze on my cheeks before they could even fall, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the agonizing betrayal tearing my heart apart. My husband, the man I had trusted and supported completely, had discarded me and our child like garbage just to impress a younger woman and elevate his pathetic corporate image. He genuinely believed that because I had quietly managed our household, I was powerless. He had conveniently forgotten the exact nature of my profession. I was not just a low-level bookkeeper tapping away at a calculator. I was a highly trained forensic accountant. My entire career was built on dismantling complex financial frauds, tracking hidden assets, and exposing men exactly like him. He had also forgotten who raised me and the kind of unyielding power that ran in my bloodline. The cold wind whipped against my face, but a new fire was beginning to burn in my chest. The helpless, weeping wife who was shoved out the door was dying in this blizzard. The woman who was going to systematically destroy Harrison's entire life was taking her first breaths. When I finally reached my father's imposing stone mansion, my hands were trembling so violently I could barely press the doorbell. The heavy wooden door swung open almost immediately. William, my father, stood there wearing a sharp-tailored sweater, his piercing gray eyes widening as he took in the sight of us. At 60 years old, William was a formidable presence. He was a fiercely intelligent and wealthy silent investor who wielded immense power in the financial world, but always kept his private life strictly protected. "Dad." I sobbed, my voice cracking as the last of my strength finally gave out. He brought his mistress home. His mother threw us out into the snow and locked the door. I lost everything. I am so sorry, Dad. William did not say the word at first. He quickly ushered us out of the freezing storm and into the warm, grand hallway. He took the crying Lily from my arms, wrapping her gently in a thick cashmere blanket from the hall closet. He handed me a steaming cup of tea that a housekeeper quickly brought out. His face remained perfectly calm, but his eyes were calculating, analyzing the situation with the ruthless precision that made him a legend in the corporate world. I stood there shivering, expecting him to express pity or maybe even anger at me for choosing such a terrible husband. Instead, William slowly walked over to the mahogany entryway table. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a heavy metal ring of keys, dropping them onto the polished wood surface with a loud, definitive clatter. He looked at his shivering granddaughter and then turned his icy, unyielding gaze to me. "They picked the wrong family," he said, his voice dangerously calm and incredibly sharp. I stared at the heavy metal keys glinting against the dark mahogany table, completely confused by his statement. My mind was still racing from the freezing walk and the brutal rejection I had just suffered. I wiped a half-frozen tear from my cheek and looked up at my father. "What do you mean they picked the wrong family?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I just told you that Harrison threw me out of our home. He legally kicked me out, Dad. He said it is his house, and Agnes agreed with him." William calmly walked over to his massive oak desk in the corner of the grand hallway. He unlocked the top drawer and pulled out a thick manila folder, tossing it onto the table right next to the keys. He gestured for me to open it. I stepped forward, my fingers still numb from the bitter cold, and flipped the folder open. As a forensic accountant, I am accustomed to scanning complex financial documents and extracting the bottom line in seconds. But what I saw on those pages made my breath catch in my throat. "This is a property deed," I said, tracing the text with my index finger. "It is the deed to the Lincoln Park house. But Harrison's name is not on here. The owner listed is a corporate entity called the Sterling Winter Trust." "I do not understand this at all, Dad. Harrison told me he secured the mortgage through a private lender 3 years ago after I spent all my savings fixing his credit score." William let out a low, humorless chuckle that carried no warmth. "Your husband is a master of illusions, Clara. He is a pathetic man who builds his ego on a foundation of absolute lies. 3 years ago, Harrison was not securing any private mortgages. He was secretly on the verge of total bankruptcy and facing complete credit ruin. He had taken out massive predatory loans without your knowledge to fund his lavish lifestyle and his desperate attempts to look wealthy among his corporate peers. When the creditors were about to seize everything, including your joint assets, and destroy your professional reputation, I stepped in. I listened in stunned silence as my father unraveled the massive lie I had been living in. William explained that he had silently bought all of Harrison's toxic debt through an intermediary. To protect my spotless credit score and shield me from the devastating fallout of my husband's reckless financial behavior, my father purchased the house outright. He placed the deed under a blind trust that he fully controlled. "Harrison does not own a single brick of that house," William stated, his gray eyes locked onto mine. "He never has. He is legally nothing more than a month-to-month tenant. I allowed him to play the king of the castle purely out of love for you, Clara. I knew you wanted a beautiful home to raise Lily in, and I did not want to break your heart by exposing what a massive failure your husband truly was behind closed doors. I structured the trust so that the property would eventually transfer to you entirely. I let him pay what he thought was a mortgage directly to the trust, but in reality he has simply been paying me rent." My mind spun as the magnitude of this revelation crashed over me. For years, Agnes had lorded that house over me, claiming her brilliant son provided a roof over my head. Harrison had strutted around those halls acting like a real estate mogul, treating me like an ungrateful guest whenever I asked him to help with chores. He had just thrown me out into a deadly blizzard, claiming I was dead weight in his glorious empire. But the empire was fake. The castle belonged to my father, and by extension, it belonged to me. I looked down at the keys on the table. They were not just spare keys. They were the master keys to the property. The realization hit me with the force of a freight train. I was not a homeless mother begging for shelter on Christmas Eve. I was the landlord. Harrison and his cruel mother were currently trespassing in my property, illegally occupying a home they had absolutely no claim to. And Brittany, the smug mistress lounging on my custom leather sofa, was nothing but an unwelcome guest in a house she could never afford. A sudden surge of intoxicating power replaced the freezing cold in my veins. The tears that had been clouding my vision completely dried up. My posture straightened, and I felt the familiar analytical coldness of my profession washing over me. I was no longer the weeping, betrayed wife. The forensic accountant inside me was fully awake, processing the data, calculating the angles, and preparing to dismantle my enemies. I looked at William, and for the first time that night, a genuine smile touched the corners of my mouth. "We hold all the cards," I said softly, realizing the sheer scale of the tactical advantage my father had just handed me. "We can evict them. We can throw Agnes and Harrison out into the exact same blizzard they just forced me into." William nodded approvingly, seeing the shift in my demeanor. "That is entirely up to you, Clara," he replied. "You are the sole beneficiary of the Sterling Winter Trust. You have the legal authority to order an immediate eviction whenever you see fit. I already have my legal team on standby awaiting your instructions. We can send the police to remove them tonight if you wish." I reached out and closed my hand around the heavy ring of keys. The cold metal grounded me. I pictured Agnes sipping my wine and Brittany laughing at my expense. I wanted to call the police. I wanted them to feel the biting cold wind on their faces. But suddenly my phone buzzed violently in my coat pocket. I pulled the device from my damp coat pocket with my free hand. The screen was blindingly bright in the dim hallway, absolutely flooded with rapid-fire push notifications. The alerts were stacking up one after another in a relentless, terrifying sequence. They were from our joint bank accounts. I quickly tapped the screen and opened the banking application. My breath hitched as I watched the numbers on the screen plummet in real time. Harrison had just executed a massive unauthorized wire transfer. He completely drained our primary joint checking account, taking every single dollar we used to manage our daily expenses. A second notification confirmed that our joint savings account, the emergency fund I had meticulously built over the past 5 years, by sacrificing my own luxuries, was also emptied down to zero. He had transferred over $80,000 into a private offshore account that I did not recognize. He was actively attempting to financially cripple me while I was standing in the snow. My thumb hovered over the screen as another notification slid down from the top edge. It was an automated email from our health insurance provider. I opened the message and my heart stopped beating for a fraction of a second. The email was a formal cancellation notice. It stated that Lily's premium pediatric health coverage had been abruptly terminated, effective immediately, at the request of the primary policyholder. Harrison had cut off our 1-year-old daughter's medical insurance on Christmas Eve. My hands started to shake again, but this time it had absolutely nothing to do with the freezing temperature outside. Lily had a history of severe respiratory issues during the winter months. She needed that premium coverage for her monthly specialist appointments and her emergency inhalers. Harrison knew this perfectly well. He knew exactly how dangerous it was to leave her uninsured during a brutal Chicago blizzard. He did not care. He was willing to risk his own daughter's physical safety just to punish me for walking in on his disgusting affair. Right on the heels of the insurance cancellation, a text message from Harrison popped up on my screen. I opened it and read the most toxic gaslighting garbage he had ever written to me. "You left me no choice, Clara." The message began dripping with a sickening blend of arrogance and fake pity. "You chose to act like a hysterical maniac in front of my guests, and you stormed out into the night, abandoning your duties as a wife. I have locked down the finances to protect my assets from your reckless behavior. Let us be realistic about how this ends. I am about to be the chief executive officer of a major firm. I have the corporate salary, the powerful connections, and the pristine public image to completely crush you in any courtroom. You are just a low-level clerk who cannot even afford a decent lawyer. I will drag you through a brutal, agonizing custody battle until you have absolutely nothing left. If you want to avoid total public humiliation, you will sign a quick, discreet divorce agreement by tomorrow morning. You will surrender full physical and legal custody of Lily to me and Brittany. You will walk away quietly, with nothing. Do this and I might throw you a few $1,000s to get a cheap apartment. Fight me and I guarantee you will not have a single dime to feed your child." I read the text message twice, letting the sheer magnitude of his delusion sink into my brain. He actually believed he was the one holding all the power. He believed he had outsmarted me by stealing the money I earned and weaponizing our daughter. He thought cutting off Lily's health care would force me to crawl back to his doorstep and beg for his mercy. I looked down at Lily, who was now sleeping soundly wrapped in my father's thick cashmere blanket. Her small chest rose and fell softly, completely oblivious to the fact that her father had just stripped away her medical protection to fund his mistress's lifestyle. Any lingering sadness I felt over my ruined marriage completely vanished. The very last shred of love or affection I held for Harrison withered and turned to ash right there in my father's hallway. "You can cheat on me, you can insult my clothes, you can throw me out into the snow, but when you threaten my child's life and hold her health insurance hostage, you awaken a completely different kind of monster." I reached up and wiped the last remaining frozen tear from my cheek. The terrified, helpless victim who had cried on that icy porch died instantly. The apex predator woke up. I handed my phone to William, allowing him to read the text message and the insurance cancellation email. My father's jaw tightened dangerously as he scanned the screen. His gray eyes darkened with a quiet, terrifying rage. He looked at me, ready to unleash his legal team and obliterate Harrison immediately. "Do not call the police yet. I said, my voice steady and cold. An eviction is too easy for him, Dad. If we kick him out tonight, he just spins the narrative. He will play the victim. He will tell his board of directors that his crazy wife and her wealthy father illegally locked him out on a holiday. He will use those stolen funds to hire a massive legal team, and he will drag this out in family court for years just to torture me. I am not going to give him that opportunity. William raised an eyebrow, a slow smile forming on his lips. What exactly do you need from me, Clara? He asked, recognizing the dangerous shift in my demeanor. I need your secure servers, I replied, walking toward the back of the mansion, where his private home office was located. I need unrestricted access to your high-speed financial terminals and your encrypted corporate networks. Harrison thinks I am just a boring bookkeeper who counts pennies. He forgot that I am a licensed forensic accountant who dismantles corporate fraud syndicates for a living. If he transferred $80,000 tonight, he left a digital footprint. And if he has enough money to buy Brittany diamond necklaces and promise her a glamorous life, he is spending cash he does not legally earn. I set my heavy winter coat on a chair and cracked my knuckles. Harrison wants to play financial warfare. I am going to show him what an actual financial execution looks like. I am going to trace every single dime he has stolen, every hidden account he has opened, and every corporate law he has broken. I am going to build a cage of irrefutable evidence so tight he will never see the outside of a federal prison. I am not just going to take my house back. I am going to take his freedom. He wanted to replace me with a shiny new trophy wife and pretend I never existed. He wanted to rewrite history and cast me as the unstable villain while he played the triumphant hero of his own pathetic story. But Harrison made a fatal miscalculation. He left me alive, and he left me with access to a computer. I looked back at William, who was now gently rocking Lily, ensuring she remained completely undisturbed by the storm raging outside. My father nodded silently, granting me full permission to unleash absolute hell. I walked into the dark office, powering on the massive dual monitors. The screens illuminated my face in the quiet room, casting a harsh blue glow over my determined features. The financial attack on my daughter was his final mistake. The countdown to Harrison's total destruction had officially begun. My name is Nora, and I am 29 years old. I stood shivering in the freezing rain, watching my parents and my younger sister Madison toss my belongings onto the muddy front lawn of my late grandfather's estate. Time to grow up and face reality, my father sneered, locking the heavy oak doors, while Madison eagerly discussed where she was going to install her new infinity pool. What they did not know was that I had a legal folder in my bag that was about to leave them entirely homeless and completely unemployed. Before I tell you how I went from being thrown into the mud to completely dismantling my family's lives, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a toxic family. Trust me, you will want to see the look on their faces when the truth finally came out. Growing up in an affluent suburb of Dallas, Texas, I learned very early that I was the invisible daughter. My father, Richard, was a high-level corporate executive who valued aggressive ambition, while my mother, Patricia, lived exclusively for country club gossip and social status. Madison, 3 years my junior, was their golden child. She was a pageant queen, effortlessly charismatic and utterly manipulative. She knew exactly how to twist our parents around her finger, and they willingly let her. The blatant favoritism was a daily reality. When Madison totaled her sports car by driving recklessly at 18, my parents comforted her with a brand new luxury SUV the very next week. When I graduated at the top of my university class with a degree in cybersecurity architecture, working 2 jobs to fund my own tuition because they refused to pay for a nerd degree, they did not even bother to attend the commencement ceremony. They were too busy taking Madison on a shopping trip to Paris. My only sanctuary in that family was my grandfather Henry. He was a self-made real estate and investment mogul who had built an empire from absolute scratch. Unlike my parents, who cared only about appearances, Henry valued substance, intelligence, and hard work. I spent my weekends at his sprawling historic estate, sitting in his grand library while he taught me about market trends, asset management, and the importance of financial independence. You have a mind like a steel trap, Nora, he would tell me, tapping his temple. Your parents only see the shiny wrapping paper, but you understand how the engine actually works. Never let them make you feel small. When grandfather Henry's health began to decline 2 years ago, the rest of the family suddenly became incredibly busy. My parents claimed their social calendars were too full to visit, and Madison outright stated that sick people depressed her aesthetic. I moved into the estate, immediately transferring to remote work so I could manage his care, cook his meals, and sit by his bedside. I spent every final moment with him, cherishing the only genuine familial love I had ever known. When he peacefully passed away 6 months ago, the absence he left in my life was suffocating. But my family did not mourn. They calculated. Within days of the funeral, my parents and Madison were already walking through the estate measuring rooms and discussing renovations. My father confidently announced that since Henry's official will had not yet been located, the estate and all its assets would naturally default to him as the only son. Madison is engaged now, my mother told me dismissively over coffee one morning. She and Derek need a proper home to start their lives and host high society events. You will need to vacate the premises by the end of the month. A dusty old house is too much for a single quiet girl anyway. I begged for more time to properly pack my grandfather's sentimental items and process my grief. They ignored me. The ultimate betrayal happened on a freezing, torrential Sunday morning. I woke up to the sound of heavy boots echoing in the hallway. I opened my bedroom door to find a crew of aggressive moving men hauling my furniture away. My father stood at the bottom of the grand staircase, his arms crossed. "Time is up, Nora," he barked. "Madison's interior designers are arriving tomorrow. We are moving your junk out today." I ran downstairs, pleading with them to stop pointing out that my expensive computer equipment and fragile family mementos were being dragged out into the pouring rain. Madison simply rolled her eyes, sipping a mimosa in the foyer. "Don't be so dramatic, Nora. You can afford a cheap apartment somewhere. This estate is for family who actually carry the legacy forward." They physically forced me out the front doors, locking the deadbolts behind me. I stood on the wet pavement, watching my ruined belongings soak in the mud, shivering as the freezing rain soaked through my thin sweater. My mother watched me through the parlor window, gave a casual dismissive wave, and closed the velvet curtains. They thought they had won. They thought they had successfully discarded the useless middle child to claim their royal palace. But my parents were entirely unaware of the secret grandfather Henry and I had orchestrated 3 years prior. Henry knew exactly how greedy and ruthless his son was. He knew that if he left a traditional will, my father would tie it up in probate court for decades, draining the funds with expensive lawyers just to spite me. So Henry did not leave a will. He executed an irrevocable blind trust. Before his mind faded, he legally transferred the deeds to the estate, his massive international investment portfolio, and the majority voting shares of my father's own corporate firm directly into that highly secure trust. And he named me as the sole, uncontested beneficiary and primary executor. I was not just a quiet cybersecurity architect sitting in the background. I was quietly sitting on an untouchable empire worth over $150 million. And the house they had just violently kicked me out of, I was the sole legal owner. I did not scream. I did not cry. I calmly gathered my laptop bag from the lawn, walked to my car, and drove to a luxury hotel downtown. I spent the next 24 hours in my suite initiating the tactical deployment of my assets. I contacted Henry's elite legal team, authorized the unsealing of the trust, and pulled the internal financial audits of my father's company. What I found in those audits was the final nail in their coffin. My father had not just been cruel, he had been criminal. He had been secretly embezzling hundreds of thousands of dollars from the company's pension funds to cover Madison's astronomical credit card debts and fund my mother's luxury lifestyle. The next evening, my parents hosted a massive catered housewarming and engagement gala at the estate to officially introduce Madison and her fiancé to Chicago's upper crust. The driveway was packed with luxury vehicles. The grand ballroom was filled with socialites, politicians, and the entire board of directors from my father's firm. I arrived at 9 p.m. I did not wear my usual modest clothes. I wore a striking tailored emerald pantsuit, and I walked past the hired security, using the master biometric clearance code I had installed on the gates weeks ago. I stepped into the grand ballroom just as my father was raising a crystal champagne flute. To my beautiful daughter Madison, and to the future of our family legacy in this magnificent home, he projected to the cheering crowd. You might want to put the glass down, Richard, I said. My voice amplified by the hall's acoustics sliced through the applause like a razor blade. The crowd parted as I walked straight to the center of the room, flanked by two highly intimidating corporate lawyers. My mother dropped her jaw and Madison sneered. "Security!" my father shouted, his face turning purple. "Remove her immediately. She is trespassing." "Actually," I replied smoothly, pulling a sleek tablet from my bag and syncing it directly to the estate's massive smart entertainment system, "you are." The enormous screens behind the grand staircase illuminated, displaying the certified legally binding property deeds. This estate, along with all associated liquid assets, belongs to the Henry Sterling Blind Trust, I announced to the silent staring crowd. A trust of which I am the sole legal owner. You did not inherit this house, Richard. You broke into it. Madison let out a shrill laugh. "You're lying. Grandpa would never leave this place to a loser like you." I ignored her and swiped my tablet to the next slide. This time, complex banking routing numbers, offshore transfer logs, and internal company receipts flashed across the screen in high definition. I looked directly at the board of directors standing near the bar. Furthermore, as the new majority shareholder of Vanguard Enterprises, I have spent the last day auditing the corporate ledgers. I stated, my voice echoing off the marble floors. My father has systematically embezzled over $800,000 from the employee pension fund to pay for his golden child's designer handbags, luxury cars, and illegal gambling debts. The room erupted into absolute chaos. The board members stared at the screen, their expressions shifting from shock to absolute fury. "This is a fabricated lie," my father screamed, sweat pouring down his face as he tried to rush the screen. "She doctored these files." "The IP addresses match your personal home network," I countered coldly, "and I have already forwarded the unencrypted, undeniable proof to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division and the SEC. Madison's fiancé, the aspiring influencer who had been clinging to her arm all night, took one look at the financial documents, proving she was not a wealthy heiress, but a broke liability. He silently set his champagne glass on a tray, turned around, and walked out the front door without a single word. Madison screamed his name, but he did not look back. My mother burst into theatrical tears, rushing toward me with her hands outstretched. "Nora, please. We are your family. You cannot do this to us. We raised you. You abandoned me." I corrected, stepping back so she could not touch me. "You threw my belongings into the freezing rain and told me to face reality, so I am returning the favor. Here is your reality." My lawyer stepped forward and handed my father, my mother, and a sobbing Madison formal eviction notices. "You have exactly 1 hour to vacate my property," I told them, staring into my father's broken, humiliated eyes. "Whatever you can carry in your hands is all you get to take. If you are still inside these walls when the hour is up, I will have you arrested for criminal trespassing." The elite guests did not stay for cake. They scrambled for the coat check, avoiding my family like a toxic plague. The board of directors informed my father on their way out that he was officially terminated and that corporate lawyers would be seizing his remaining assets by morning. I stood in the center of the grand foyer watching as the people who had made my entire life a miserable, invisible shadow desperately stuffed clothes into garbage bags. They walked out into the cold night stripped of their power, their stolen money, and their false prestige. The heavy oak doors closed behind them and the estate was finally quiet. I walked into my grandfather's library, poured myself a glass of his favorite scotch, and raised it to his portrait above the fireplace. I had protected his legacy, reclaimed my worth, and delivered the ultimate justice. Sometimes the quietest people in the room are the ones holding all the keys. I sat back in my father's heavy leather desk chair, the harsh blue light of the dual monitors reflecting in my eyes. I had spent the last 8 hours pulling every public financial record, tracking IP addresses, and mapping out Harrison's recent financial movements. The math simply did not add up. Harrison's supposed promotion to chief executive officer and his sudden influx of cash completely contradicted his legal taxable income. There was a massive black hole in his finances, a highly sophisticated web of dummy accounts and offshore transfers. But to definitively prove my theory and tie the stolen funds directly to his name, I needed something I did not currently have. I needed inside access to his corporate server. As I rubbed my exhausted eyes, my phone buzzed on the desk. I expected another threatening message from Harrison or a gloating text from Agnes. Instead, the name flashing on the screen surprised me. It was Jasmine. Jasmine is 30 years old and married to Harrison's older brother, Trent. She is a brilliant African-American corporate lawyer who has always been the only other sane person in that deeply toxic family. From the day Jasmine married Trent, Agnes had tried to tear her down constantly, making passive-aggressive remarks about her background and her demanding career. But Jasmine never let Agnes intimidate her. She saw right through my mother-in-law's narcissism and Harrison's unchecked arrogance. Her text message was brief and urgent. "Clara, I know what they did to you tonight. Trent and I are disgusted. I need to see you immediately. Name a place where Harrison will not look." I quickly typed out the address of a small, rundown 24-hour diner located on the outskirts of the city, miles away from the affluent neighborhoods Harrison and Agnes frequented. I grabbed my winter coat, kissed my sleeping daughter's forehead, and assured my father I would be back soon. William offered to send his private security detail with me, but I declined. This meeting required absolute discretion. The diner was nearly empty when I arrived. The neon sign outside buzzed loudly in the freezing wind, and the smell of stale coffee hung in the thick air. Jasmine was already sitting in a corner booth, nursing a black coffee. She looked immaculate, even at this early hour of the morning, wearing a sharp camel trench coat, her expression tight, with suppressed rage. I slid into the cracked vinyl booth across from her, taking a deep breath to steady my racing heart. Jasmine did not offer empty platitudes or fake sympathy. She leaned forward, her dark eyes flashing with absolute fury. "Agnes called Trent 2 hours ago." Jasmine began, her voice a low, controlled whisper. "She was actually bragging. She told us that you had a mental breakdown, abandoned Harrison on Christmas Eve, and left the house voluntarily. She said Harrison had to freeze the bank accounts to protect the family assets from your erratic behavior." I let out a dry, humorless laugh, feeling a fresh wave of disgust. "They threw me and Lily out into a blizzard." "Jasmine," I explained quietly. "Agnes shoved me out the front door and Harrison canceled Lily's premium health insurance just to punish me. He drained our joint savings and transferred the money to an offshore account, so I cannot afford a lawyer to fight him for custody." Jasmine's jaw clenched so hard I thought her teeth might crack. "I knew they were lying," she said, her voice trembling with anger. "Agnes has always been a toxic nightmare, and Harrison is a narcissistic fraud. But throwing a 1-year-old baby out into sub-zero temperatures and canceling her medical coverage is pure evil. I refuse to stand by and watch them do this to you." I looked at Jasmine, feeling a sudden surge of profound gratitude. She was risking her own position in the family by meeting with me. "Trent is Harrison's brother," I pointed out carefully, measuring her response. "Where does he stand in all of this? Will he cover for them to protect the family name?" "Trent is entirely done with them," Jasmine stated firmly. "He has spent his entire life watching Agnes coddle Harrison and excuse his failures. When Agnes called tonight to brag about kicking you out, Trent told her she was a monster and hung up the phone. We are completely on your side, Clara. We want to help you take them down." I took a deep breath, recognizing that I had just been handed the exact opportunity I desperately needed. "I do not just want a standard divorce, Jasmine," I said, locking eyes with her. "I am going to completely dismantle Harrison's life. I have been tracking his finances all night. He is hiding massive amounts of money, and I strongly suspect he is embezzling from his firm's clients to fund his lifestyle and impress his mistress. But I am hitting a digital firewall. I need internal data. I need access to his corporate files to prove it." Jasmine's eyes lit up with a dangerous calculating intelligence. As a highly trained corporate lawyer, she instantly understood the legal and financial implications of what I was suggesting. If Harrison is committing corporate fraud, he is facing decades in federal prison. She noted a cold smile touching her lips. She reached across the table and grasped my hand tightly. "We are going to destroy him, Clara," she said. "And we are going to make sure Agnes watches her golden boy lose everything." Before I could ask how we were going to bypass his company's security protocols, Jasmine opened her sleek leather handbag. She pulled out a small silver device and set it on the table between our coffee cups. I stared at the metallic object, realizing exactly what she had brought me. It was not just a symbol of our new alliance. It was the absolute weapon of his destruction. We sat in that quiet diner, finalizing the end of my husband's reign. The freezing storm outside paled in comparison to the absolute storm we were actively building inside that booth. I knew my father was right. They had definitely picked the wrong family to cross, and I was going to prove it. I picked up the silver flash drive and slipped it securely into my coat pocket. The metal was cold against my skin, a stark reminder of the frozen porch I had stood on just hours before. Jasmine leaned back, her expression shifting from anger to a deeply focused determination. She began outlining the legal parameters we needed to navigate to ensure this evidence remained admissible in federal court. She explained how Trent had deliberately ignored a frantic follow-up call from Agnes, cementing their total withdrawal from the toxic family dynamic. We were effectively isolating Harrison and Agnes, leaving them entirely blind to the massive legal machinery we were assembling against them. Every word Jasmine spoke reinforced my confidence. I was no longer fighting a lonely, desperate battle. I had a brilliant legal strategist guiding my moves and ensuring our retaliation was perfectly legal, completely lethal, and absolutely devastating. We spent another 45 minutes coordinating our communication protocols. We established secure channels and agreed to avoid any digital platforms Harrison might monitor. As the diner waitress approached to refill our mugs, I felt a profound sense of empowerment. The terrified, abandoned mother was completely gone, replaced by a woman actively plotting a financial execution. The drive back to my father's mansion was a blur of calculating thoughts and strategic planning. The blizzard had finally begun to subside, leaving the Chicago streets buried under a thick, quiet blanket of white snow. The silence of the car allowed my mind to race through the endless possibilities hidden within the silver flash drive resting in my pocket. I knew Harrison was arrogant, but I also knew he was incredibly sloppy. He relied entirely on his charm and his mother's aggressive shielding to navigate through his professional life. He had never possessed the meticulous attention to detail required to successfully execute and conceal a massive corporate embezzlement scheme long-term. When I walked back into William's grand foyer, the house was warm and perfectly silent. I checked on Lily, who was still sleeping peacefully in the luxurious guest room, completely safe from the chaos her father had created. I gently stroked her soft cheek silently, promising her that she would never have to worry about anything ever again. I quietly closed her bedroom door and headed straight back to my father's secure home office. William had left a fresh pot of coffee on the desk for me, a silent gesture of his unwavering support. I sat down in the heavy leather chair and plugged Jasmine's flash drive into the secure terminal. The encryption on Harrison's personal folder was pitifully basic. It took me less than 10 minutes to bypass the amateur security measures and access the raw data. As the files populated on my dual monitors, I felt a sickening mixture of total vindication and profound disgust. Jasmine had hit the absolute jackpot. The drive contained hundreds of internal corporate ledgers, unredacted client portfolios, and highly sensitive wire transfer receipts. I cracked my knuckles and began the meticulous, painstaking process of forensic auditing. I started cross-referencing Harrison's personal bank statements with his firm's elite client accounts, comparing dates and routing numbers. It did not take long to find the massive, gaping anomalies. Harrison had set up 3 separate shell companies, registered in the Cayman Islands. He was actively skimming money from his firm's top-tier investors, transferring the stolen funds into these dummy accounts, under the guise of external corporate consulting fees. He would then slowly funnel the money back into his own private accounts to avoid triggering immediate red flags with the tax authorities. But he was getting incredibly greedy and ridiculously reckless. The amount of stolen money was absolutely staggering. Over the past 2 years, he had embezzled nearly $4 million. He was using this stolen wealth to fund his luxurious lifestyle, pay for his expensive tailored suits, and ultimately buy his way into a major executive promotion by bribing key board members with lavish gifts. But the most enraging discovery came when I carefully audited the specific $80,000 transfer he had executed earlier that night. He had not just drained our joint savings account to punish me. He had actively liquidated Lily's entire college fund, a secure investment account I had started the day she was born and contributed to from every single one of my paychecks. He had literally stolen his own daughter's future. I traced the routing number for that specific transfer. It did not go into a secure savings account or an offshore trust for safekeeping. The stolen money had been wired directly to a luxury exotic car dealership in downtown Chicago. Harrison had taken his infant daughter's educational tuition to purchase a brand new sports car for Brittany, his 26-year-old mistress. The sheer, unadulterated evil of that specific action made my blood boil violently in my veins. He had completely destroyed his family, thrown us into a deadly blizzard, canceled my daughter's health insurance, and stolen her education fund, all to impress a woman who cared only about his wallet. I spent the next 3 days locked in my father's office, barely sleeping or eating. I meticulously documented every single fraudulent transaction, creating a highly detailed, irrefutable paper trail that connected Harrison directly to the missing millions. I compiled bank statements, IP login records, and forged signature logs. I built a comprehensive, devastating dossier of his ongoing criminal activity. William occasionally checked on me, reviewing my progress with a grim, highly satisfied nod. "You have him dead to rights, Clara," my father noted, looking over a particularly damning spreadsheet. "The federal authorities will have an absolute field day with this evidence." "I am not just handing this over to the authorities quietly," I replied, saving the final encrypted backup file. "He wants to publicly introduce his mistress at a massive New Year's Eve gala. He wants to stand in front of the very investors he is actively robbing and demand their applause. I am going to give him exactly the audience he desperately craves." While I was finalizing the audit, Agnes initiated her next move. My phone rang on Wednesday afternoon. The caller ID showed a blocked number, but I knew exactly who it was. I answered the call, immediately activating the recording application on my secure laptop. Well, if it is not the runaway wife?" Agnes sneered, her voice echoing loudly through the speakerphone. "I am surprised you actually answered. I assumed you were too busy hiding in utter shame." I kept my voice perfectly neutral, revealing absolutely nothing about my current state of mind. "What exactly do you want, Agnes?" I asked calmly. "I am calling to do you a massive favor, Clara," she replied, her tone dripping with malicious condescension. "Harrison is currently moving Brittany's beautiful new furniture into the master bedroom. We are actively clearing out the remaining trash you left behind, including that pathetic, dusty wooden box you keep in the hall closet." My stomach plummeted instantly. She was talking about the handmade cedar box that contained the only surviving keepsakes from my late mother. It held her wedding ring, a collection of handwritten letters, and the vintage pearl necklace she wore before she passed away when I was 12. "Do not touch that box," I warned, my voice dropping an octave. Agnes laughed cruelly. "It is taking up valuable space, Clara. Brittany needs room for her designer shoe collection. If you want this junk, you have exactly 2 hours to come to the house and retrieve it. If you are not here," she continued, twisting the knife, "I will personally throw it all into the fireplace and burn it to ashes. I will be there in 30 minutes. I replied, my voice completely flat and disconnected from any trace of emotion. I pressed the end call button and set the smartphone down on the heavy mahogany desk. My father, William, looked up from his legal briefs, his eyes narrowing as he registered the dangerous shift in my posture. They want me to come back to the house, I explained calmly. Agnes is threatening to burn my mother's keepsakes if I do not show up immediately. It is a blatant trap. They want to corner me without your security detail and force me to sign away my rights. William stood up instantly, reaching for his tailored suit jacket draped over the chair. I will call the security team right now. We are going together. No, I said, raising a hand to stop him. I need to go alone. If you show up with armed guards, Harrison will immediately play the victim. He will spin a narrative of intimidation and claim we are bullying him. I need them to feel completely in control. I need them to become incredibly arrogant because arrogant people make massive, catastrophic mistakes. As I was pulling on my heavy winter coat, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text message from Jasmine. She was risking a lot by reaching out during her workday at the corporate law firm, but the urgency in her message was entirely clear. Call me right now, she wrote. It is an absolute emergency. I dialed her number while walking purposefully toward my car. Clara listened to me carefully. Jasmine said the exact moment she answered, her voice tight with genuine panic. You cannot talk to anyone in the extended family right now. Agnes has completely poisoned the well. What do you mean? I asked, starting the engine and blasting the heater against the freezing Chicago air. She has spent the last 48 hours executing a horrific gaslighting campaign. Jasmine explained, her disgust completely evident through the speakers. Agnes has been calling every single aunt, uncle, and cousin in the family directory. She has even reached out to Harrison's key corporate investors under the guise of an apologetic mother. She is telling everyone that you are a severely mentally unstable and violently abusive wife. She actually manufactured a completely psychotic story, claiming that you had a massive psychological breakdown on Christmas Eve, abandoned Harrison, and ran off with another man, leaving Lily behind. My hands gripped the leather steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned completely white. They threw me out into a deadly blizzard and canceled my infant daughter's health insurance, and now they are telling people I abandoned my own child. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of the lie was breathtaking. It was a calculated strike designed to isolate me from any potential allies and ruin my credibility before I could even speak. It gets worse, Jasmine continued, her tone dropping lower, as if she feared being overheard. Harrison is using this fabricated narrative to garner immense sympathy from his firm's board of directors. He is painting himself as the tragic, devoted single father who is bravely holding his family together despite his wicked, insane wife. They are rapidly laying the groundwork to have you committed or completely discredited before you can ever see the inside of a family court. I merged onto the icy highway, my mind operating with total clinical detachment. The forensic accountant inside me began categorizing these lies as future evidence of malicious defamation. Why are they pushing this specific narrative so aggressively right now? I asked. Why demand I come to the house today to sign divorce papers when they already think I am entirely broke and powerless? Because of the New Year's Eve gala, Jasmine revealed, dropping the final critical piece of the puzzle perfectly into place. Harrison is hosting a massive, highly publicized event at the mansion this coming weekend. It is supposed to be his ultimate corporate coronation. He is officially introducing Brittany to his elite social circles and presenting her as his brilliant new partner. More importantly, he is using this lavish gala to announce his official promotion to Chief Executive Officer and secure millions in new venture capital investments from private backers. I hit the brakes slightly as a snowplow passed my mind, rapidly processing this vital intelligence. The entire picture came into sharp, terrifying focus. He needs you entirely erased before the party begins, Jasmine warned urgently. He needs your legal signature on a quick divorce settlement and a complete custody surrender so he can present himself as a legally unencumbered man to his wealthy investors. If the board of directors finds out he is in the middle of a messy, contested divorce with a wife who is fighting back, it could completely jeopardize his promotion and the incoming investment capital. They are trying to force you into a corner today so they can celebrate their grand victory tomorrow. They want a clean slate for the new year. A cold, ruthless smile spread across my face, reflecting in the rearview mirror. They wanted to erase me to clear the stage for their grand performance. They wanted to parade my husband's mistress around my house and toast to a future funded by my stolen money. They had absolutely no idea I was already directing the entire show from the shadows. "Thank you, Jasmine," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, focused whisper. "You just gave me exactly what I needed. Let them set up the gala. Let them invite every single investor and board member they can find. I want the house completely packed to the brim with Chicago's elite." "What are you going to do?" Jasmine asked, a hint of nervous excitement mingling with the fear in her voice. "I am going to let Harrison build his beautiful glass castle," I replied smoothly, turning onto the familiar affluent street of my old neighborhood. "And then I am going to shatter it while everyone he desperately wants to impress is watching." I hung up the phone and parked a block away from the massive estate to avoid detection. The trap was set, and I was walking straight into the jaws of the beast. But I was not bringing a pen to blindly sign their extortion demands. I was bringing the matches to burn their entire illusion straight to the ground. I stepped out of the car, bracing myself against the biting wind, and walked toward the front door, ready to face my executioners. "My name is Clara, and I am 33 years old." Dad opened the door. On a freezing Christmas Eve in Chicago, I stood trembling on my father's porch, clutching my soaking wet 1-year-old daughter Lily to my chest. "He brought his mistress home," I whispered as the brutal blizzard howled around us, whipping snow into our faces. His mother packed up our things, threw the two of us out into the freezing cold, and locked the door. My father, William, looked at his little granddaughter shivering uncontrollably from the plunging temperatures. He tightened his grip on the heavy ring of keys in his hand, his eyes turning to absolute ice. "They picked the wrong family," he said. "Until that terrible freezing night, I thought I had a marriage built on partnership, mutual respect, and unwavering trust." If you are watching this from somewhere where family betrayal hits close to home, let me know in the comments where you are watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe to see exactly how a silent accountant completely dismantled an entire fake empire. Exactly 2 hours before standing on that freezing porch, my life had seemed perfectly normal. I was driving home through the heavy Chicago snowstorm, with the heater blasting in my car, feeling exhausted but deeply happy. I had just spent the last 3 hours battling horrible holiday traffic to secure the final Christmas presents for my family. In the back seat, little Lily was fast asleep, her tiny chest rising and falling in a peaceful rhythm. I was completely focused on getting back to our beautiful 3-story brick home in Lincoln Park. Harrison, my husband of 5 years, had texted me earlier saying he was finishing up some important work in his home office. His mother, Agnes, had flown in for the holidays and was supposedly baking cookies in the kitchen. I imagined walking into a house filled with the comforting scent of cinnamon and the warmth of a crackling fireplace. When I pulled into the driveway, the property looked exactly like a picturesque holiday greeting card. Fresh snow dusted the roof, and warm golden light spilled from the large bay windows onto the front lawn. I carefully unbuckled Lily from her car seat, wrapping her in a thick woolen blanket to protect her from the biting winter wind. Balancing my sleeping daughter on one hip and carrying 2 heavy shopping bags with my free hand, I made my way up the icy front steps. I unlocked the heavy oak door, trying to be as quiet as possible so I would not wake the baby. The moment I stepped into the grand foyer, the beautiful illusion of my perfect family life shattered into a million jagged pieces. There was no smell of baking cookies. Instead, the air was thick with the scent of an expensive, heavy floral perfume that I definitely did not own. The sprawling living room was illuminated only by the soft glow of the fireplace and the twinkling lights of our 12-foot Christmas tree. I dropped my keys on the console table, and the sharp metal clatter echoed loudly through the silent house. That was when I saw them. Harrison, my husband. The man I had faithfully supported through years of severe financial struggles, was aggressively kissing a young blonde woman right on our custom leather sofa. She had her arms wrapped tightly around his neck, and her long legs were draped possessively over his lap. I recognized her immediately. It was Brittany, a 26-year-old junior marketing assistant from his corporate office. Harrison had always described her as a clueless intern who constantly needed his professional mentorship. Clearly, his mentorship extended far beyond office hours and professional boundaries. My breath caught painfully in my throat. I stood absolutely frozen in the entryway, clutching my sleeping child tightly against my winter coat. I tried to speak, but my voice completely failed me. My mind desperately tried to process the impossible and disgusting scene playing out in my own living room on Christmas Eve. But the most disturbing part of the scene was not my husband intimately entangled with his subordinate. The most sickening detail was sitting just 10 feet away in the oversized velvet armchair by the fire. Agnes, my mother-in-law, was calmly sipping a glass of my expensive red wine. She was not shocked by the infidelity. She was not yelling at her son to stop ruining his marriage. She was simply watching them with a pleased, satisfied smile on her face, like she was observing a romantic movie theater screen. "What is going on here?" I finally managed to say. My voice cracked loudly, breaking the heavy silence and startling Lily, who began to fuss and cry against my shoulder. Harrison jumped up from the sofa, hastily straightening his wrinkled dress shirt. He did not look ashamed or guilty. He did not rush forward to apologize or beg for my forgiveness. Instead, he let out an annoyed scoff and ran a hand through his hair, looking at me as if I was the one rudely intruding on his private moment. Brittany simply adjusted her tight dress and offered me a smug, unapologetic smirk before casually picking up her champagne glass from the glass coffee table. Agnes slowly set her wine glass down and stood up, smoothing her designer skirt with deliberate slowness. She walked toward me with a cold, calculating expression that sent chills down my spine. There was no warmth in her eyes, only a deeply rooted disdain that she was finally allowing to fully surface. "You are home early, Clara," Agnes said, her tone flat and completely devoid of any human empathy. "We were not expecting you to return for another hour." "That is your explanation," I demanded, holding Lily tighter as the baby began to cry louder. "Your son is kissing his assistant in our living room, and you are just sitting there drinking wine." Agnes crossed her arms defensively over her chest and looked me up and down with obvious disgust. "Let us be perfectly honest with ourselves, Clara," she said, her voice dripping with toxic venom. "You have always been a massive disappointment to this family. Harrison is moving up in the world rapidly. He is about to be named Chief Executive Officer of his firm. He is entering an elite new echelon of wealth and corporate power. He needs a woman who matches his elevated status. He needs a vibrant, stunning trophy wife like Brittany, who can host corporate galas and impress the board of directors." I stared at her, feeling the blood drain completely from my face. I could not believe the sheer audacity of what I was hearing from the woman who was supposed to be my family. "I am his wife," I fired back, my voice trembling with rising anger. "I have spent the last 5 years of my life paying off his massive student loans and his reckless credit card debts. I put my own career goals on the back burner so I could stay home and raise his daughter. I supported him when he had absolutely nothing to his name." Agnes let out a sharp, mocking laugh that echoed terribly in the large open room. "Oh, please do not act like you are some kind of noble martyr," she sneered, stepping even closer to my face. "You are just a boring, low-level bookkeeper with absolutely zero ambition. You spend your days looking at spreadsheets and wearing cheap sweaters. Do you really think a man of Harrison caliber wants to come home to a tired calculator? You do not belong in his glamorous world anymore, Clara. You simply do not fit the image of a high-powered executive wife." I returned to my father's house with the flash drive clutched tightly in my hand. The freezing Chicago wind whipped around me as I hurried up the steps, but I barely felt the cold. My mind was already racing ahead to the data waiting inside that small piece of plastic. Jasmine had taken a massive risk securing this information from Harrison's home office. Now it was my turn to do what I did best. I walked into the grand foyer where the ambient warmth of the house wrapped around me. I checked on Lily first. My sweet 1-year-old daughter was sleeping peacefully in the guest nursery, safe and completely unaware of the storm raging through our lives. Looking at her innocent face hardened my resolve. Harrison had thrown us out into the snow to impress his mistress and please his mother. He thought I was just a boring numbers cruncher who would quietly accept defeat. He was about to learn exactly why forensic accountants are the most dangerous enemies a liar can make. I made my way down the hall to my father's private study. William had given me full access to his secure network and high-speed computers. The room was lined with dark oak bookshelves and heavy leather furniture. I sat at the massive mahogany desk and booted up the primary workstation. I plugged the USB drive into the port and waited for the files to load. Harrison had always been arrogant, and his digital security reflected that arrogance. He used basic passwords and lazy encryption methods, assuming no one would ever dare investigate him. It took me less than 20 minutes to bypass his rudimentary security measures and access the core folders Jasmine had copied. The screen illuminated with spreadsheets, bank statements, and internal corporate memos. I started with our personal finances. I needed to see exactly how much damage he had done before cutting off my access to our joint accounts. What I found made my blood run cold. Harrison had not just emptied our shared savings. He had systematically drained accounts I thought were untouchable. My eyes scanned the lines of data searching for the specific account number associated with Lily's college fund. I had started that fund the week she was born, depositing a portion of every paycheck to ensure her future was secure. The balance read 0. I blinked, staring at the screen as a wave of pure nausea washed over me. He had liquidated his own infant daughter's education fund. I pulled the transaction history, my fingers flying across the keyboard to trace the exact routing numbers. The massive wire transfer had been executed just 3 days ago. I followed the digital paper trail, watching the money move from Lily's secure trust into Harrison's private checking account, and then immediately out to a third-party vendor. I cross-referenced the receiving routing number with public business registries. The vendor was a luxury exotic car dealership located in downtown Chicago. I dug deeper into his deleted email archives, recovering a digital receipt that he had foolishly thought was permanently erased. The receipt detailed the purchase of a brand new custom-ordered Porsche. The buyer was Harrison, and the registered co-owner was Brittany. He had stolen the money I saved for our baby girl's future to buy a luxury sports car for his 26-year-old mistress. A normal person might have broken down and cried at that moment. But the sheer unadulterated evil of his actions completely extinguished any remaining trace of sorrow in my heart. The victim who wept on the freezing porch was officially dead. I felt a terrifying absolute calm settle over my entire body. I saved the receipt, the wire transfer logs, and the account statements into a secure encrypted folder on my father's server. This was no longer just a messy divorce. This was a financial execution, and I was the judge and jury. I shifted my focus away from our personal accounts and opened the massive folders containing his corporate ledgers. Agnes had spent the entire evening bragging about Harrison's upcoming promotion to chief executive officer. She had mocked my career, claiming her son was entering an elite echelon of corporate power. I began to run complex algorithms against his firm's internal financial reports, comparing his department's stated revenue with the actual cash flow. Forensic accounting is like untangling a massive knot. You pull one loose thread, and eventually the entire structure unravels. The threads in Harrison's ledgers were practically glowing. As I analyzed the data, an enormous black hole in his finances became undeniably clear. Harrison was living a lifestyle that cost millions of dollars a year, but his legal corporate salary was only a fraction of that amount. He was purchasing expensive jewelry, booking lavish international vacations, and maintaining a fake image of extreme wealth to impress Brittany and his demanding mother. I needed to find out exactly where the extra cash was coming from. I isolated the accounts of his firm's most elite clients. These were wealthy investors who trusted Harrison to manage their massive portfolios. Using specialized tracing software, I tracked the movement of their investment capital. The initial deposits looked completely legitimate, but when I scrutinized the quarterly transfer logs, I noticed a recurring pattern of fractional diversions. Harrison was actively skimming money from the top-tier client accounts. He was siphoning off hundreds of thousands of dollars at a time, disguising the theft as external corporate consulting fees and administrative market adjustments. I followed the stolen money across the globe. Harrison had set up 3 separate dummy shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands. He used fake executive boards and fabricated service contracts to make the shell companies look like legitimate international vendors. The embezzled client funds flowed directly into these offshore accounts where they were washed, and then slowly funneled back into Harrison's private domestic bank accounts. It was a classic but massive money laundering and embezzlement scheme. Over the past 2 years, he had successfully stolen over $4 million from the people who trusted him most. The sheer arrogance of his crime was breathtaking. He was actively robbing the very board of directors who were preparing to promote him to CEO. He planned to stand in front of those same investors at his upcoming New Year's Eve gala, demanding their applause while he secretly drained their wealth. Harrison was not a brilliant executive. He was a reckless, desperate criminal, building a glass castle on a foundation of massive federal felonies. I leaned back in the leather chair, the blue light of the monitors illuminating the cold smile on my face. I spent the next several hours meticulously compiling the evidence. I organized the fake invoices, the offshore routing numbers, the IP login records, and the falsified client reports. I built a comprehensive bulletproof dossier of his entire criminal syndicate. Every single document was triple backed up and secured. Harrison thought he had left me with nothing. He had no idea that I now held the absolute power to send him to federal prison for decades. He was a fraud, and he was going down. As the sun began to rise over the frozen Chicago skyline, painting the snow-covered streets, in a pale morning light, I finally stepped away from the monitors. My eyes burned from staring at the screens all night, but my mind was sharper than it had ever been. I had just finished saving the final encrypted backup of Harrison's completely ruined life to a secure cloud server. I leaned my head back against the leather chair and closed my eyes for just a second. Then my cell phone vibrated violently against the mahogany desk, shattering the quiet of my father's study. I opened my eyes and looked at the screen. The caller ID displayed a blocked number. A normal person might have ignored it, but my instincts told me exactly who was on the other end. I swiped the screen and answered, keeping my breathing perfectly steady and completely silent. Well, if it is not the runaway wife," Agnes sneered, her voice echoing loudly through the speakerphone. "I am surprised you actually answered. I assumed you were too busy hiding in utter shame." I kept my voice perfectly neutral, revealing absolutely nothing about my current state of mind. "What exactly do you want, Agnes?" I asked calmly. "I am calling to do you a massive favor, Clara," she replied, her tone dripping with malicious condescension. "Harrison is currently moving Brittany's beautiful new furniture into the master bedroom. We are actively clearing out the remaining trash you left behind, including that pathetic, dusty wooden box you keep in the hall closet." My stomach plummeted instantly. She was talking about the handmade cedar box that contained the only surviving keepsakes from my late mother. It held her wedding ring, a collection of handwritten letters, and the vintage pearl necklace she wore before she passed away when I was 12. "Do not touch that box," I warned, my voice dropping an octave. Agnes laughed cruelly. "It is taking up valuable space, Clara. Brittany needs room for her designer shoe collection. If you want this junk, you have exactly 1 hour to come to the house and retrieve it. If you are not here," she continued, twisting the knife, "I will personally throw it all into the fireplace and burn it to ashes." I squeezed my eyes shut, fighting the sudden surge of protective rage. But then Agnes revealed the true purpose of her sinister phone call. However, she added sweetly, "You will not just be picking up your garbage. Harrison has prepared some legal documents. A quick divorce agreement and a full custody surrender for Lily. He is feeling incredibly generous today. If you sign the papers immediately and waive all rights to his assets, he will let you take your mother's box. If you refuse, or if you try to bring your father or his lawyers with you, the box goes straight into the flames. Come alone, Clara. You have 1 hour." The line went dead. I set the phone down on the desk and let out a slow, steady breath. The absolute audacity of their plan was almost impressive in its pure wickedness. I saw exactly what they were doing. Harrison and Agnes knew that if I had time to secure a lawyer, or if my father William got involved, their chances of walking away cleanly would evaporate entirely. They needed to corner me while they still thought I was completely broken, destitute, and terrified. They were holding my most precious memories hostage to force a signature under extreme duress. They wanted a clean slate for the new year, so Harrison could parade around his New Year's Eve gala as a legally unencumbered man ready to conquer the corporate world. They thought I was weak. They thought my love for my late mother would make me reckless and compliant. They were completely wrong. I stood up from the desk and walked over to my father's safe. I had a plan. I was going to walk straight into their trap, but I was not going to be the prey. I walked down the hall to the guest room and kissed my sleeping daughter. I pulled the heavy winter coat over my shoulders and made my way to the kitchen where William was drinking his morning coffee. "I am going back to the house," I told him, my voice steady. "Agnes has my mother's cedar box. She is threatening to burn it if I do not come alone to sign custody papers." William stood up instantly, his coffee mug hitting the granite counter with a loud thud. His eyes blazed with protective fury. "I will call the security team right now," he declared, reaching for his phone. "We will tear that door off its hinges." "No," I said, raising a hand to stop him. "I need to go entirely alone. If you show up with armed guards, Harrison will immediately play the victim. He will spin a narrative of intimidation and claim we are bullying him. I need them to feel completely in control. I need them to become incredibly arrogant, because arrogant people make massive, catastrophic mistakes." William paused, studying my face. He saw the cold, clinical determination in my eyes and recognized the predator I had become overnight. "What is your play, Clara?" he asked softly. "I am going to let them commit a felony on tape," I replied. I reached into my bag and pulled out a specialized digital audio recorder I used for discreet client audits. It was small enough to fit securely inside the hidden interior pocket of my winter coat. Illinois allows one-party consent for recording conversations. I was entirely within my legal rights to document my own extortion. I checked the battery, secured the microphone, and switched the device to record. The tiny red light blinked, affirming that every single word spoken from this moment forward would be permanently preserved. I buttoned my coat up to my chin. My heart, which had shattered into a million pieces just hours ago, had frozen solid. It was now a heart made of absolute ice. "I am going to walk in there and let them threaten me," I told William, my voice echoing with icy resolve. "I am going to let them lay out their entire blackmail scheme. I am going to let Harrison demand my child and my dignity. And then I am going to walk out with my mother's box and the exact evidence I need to guarantee he never sees daylight again." William gave me a slow, proud nod. He tossed me the keys to his armored SUV. "Bring them to their knees, Clara," he said. I gripped the keys tightly and walked out into the freezing Chicago morning. The storm had passed, leaving a blanket of deceptive white snow over the city. I started the engine and drove back toward the house that was legally mine. The trap was set, and I was willingly stepping inside. But I was not bringing a pen to sign their extortion demands. I was bringing the matches to burn their entire illusions straight to the ground. I parked a block away to avoid suspicion and walked the rest of the way, stepping carefully through the icy slush. I reached the front porch where my frozen suitcase still sat, buried under a fresh layer of snow. I took one final deep breath, letting the freezing air fill my lungs and solidify my resolve. The forensic accountant was ready for her final audit. I reached out and firmly knocked on the heavy oak door, waiting to face the monsters inside. The heavy oak door swung open before I could even raise my hand to knock. Agnes stood there, blocking the entryway with her arms crossed tightly over her cashmere cardigan. A smug, triumphant smile played on her lips. She stepped aside without saying a single word, gesturing for me to enter the house I legally owned. I walked past her, keeping my posture perfectly straight. The hidden audio recorder, tucked safely inside my winter coat pocket, captured the heavy sound of my snow-covered boots stepping onto the polished hardwood floor. I was walking straight into the lion's den, but I felt absolutely no fear. I stepped into the sprawling living room and took in the highly orchestrated scene waiting for me. Harrison sat in the center of the plush leather sofa, looking like a king presiding over his recently conquered territory. To his right sat a man I had never seen before. He wore a cheap, ill-fitting suit and had the nervous, sweaty demeanor of a lawyer who specialized in back-alley settlements rather than actual corporate law. To Harrison's left, lounging horizontally with her bare feet propped arrogantly on the glass coffee table, was Brittany. She was wearing my thick knitted throw blanket over her shoulders and holding my favorite ceramic coffee mug. The sheer disrespect was palpable, but I did not let a single ounce of emotion show on my face. My eyes immediately scanned the room for the only thing that mattered. There, resting precariously on the very edge of the stone fireplace hearth, was my mother's handmade cedar box. The fire was roaring behind it, sending orange sparks dancing dangerously close to the polished antique wood. Agnes walked up behind me and followed my gaze. She let out a soft, cruel laugh. As promised, she said, gesturing toward the fireplace. "The trash is ready for collection, but first we have some urgent business to attend to." Harrison cleared his throat and leaned forward, attempting to project an aura of absolute corporate authority. "Sit down, Clara," he commanded, pointing to a stiff wooden chair positioned directly across from the sofa. It was deliberately placed to make me feel small and interrogated. I remained standing, keeping my winter coat buttoned to my chin to shield the recording device. "I prefer to stand," I replied, my voice completely devoid of any inflection. "Let us get this over with." Harrison's jaw tightened at my defiance, but he nodded sharply to the sweaty man sitting next to him. The man nervously opened his battered leather briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. He cleared his throat purposely, avoiding my eyes. "Mrs. Sterling," he began, his voice slightly shaky. "I am Mr. Vance, representing your husband in this matter. We have drafted a comprehensive separation agreement designed to expedite the dissolution of your marriage while protecting the best interests of all parties involved." He slid the stack of papers across the glass coffee table, pushing them right to the edge where I was standing. I did not reach for them immediately. I simply looked down at the bold printed headers on the top pages. Even upside down, my highly trained eyes instantly recognized the aggressive legal formatting. The first document was a quitclaim deed. It was explicitly drafted to force me to surrender any and all legal rights, titles, and interests in the Lincoln Park estate, transferring sole ownership directly to Harrison. The second document was far worse. It was a binding custody surrender agreement. It stipulated that I would grant Harrison full physical and legal custody of Lily, permanently waiving my rights to alimony, child support, and any future claims against his corporate earnings or retirement accounts. "This is absolute robbery," I said, keeping my tone conversational rather than hysterical. "You are asking me to sign away my home and my child in exchange for a wooden box." Harrison sneered, leaning back and crossing his arms behind his head. "I am offering you a graceful exit, Clara," he stated arrogantly. "If you sign those papers right now, you can take your mother's junk and walk out of here with a check for $5,000 to help you secure a cheap apartment. If you refuse, we will make your life a living hell. Mr. Vance here is prepared to file an emergency ex parte motion tomorrow morning, citing your erratic behavior and total financial insolvency." Brittany took a loud sip from my mug and giggled. "You should really take the deal, Clara," she chimed in, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Harrison is going to be a chief executive officer. A judge will look at his massive salary and then look at your sad little empty bank account and hand Lily over to us immediately. We can give her a beautiful life. You cannot even afford to turn the heat on without his money." Mr. Vance tapped his pen against the glass table. "My client is offering you a highly generous settlement under the circumstances," he added, sweating slightly under his cheap collar. "If we go to court, we will be forced to present evidence of your severe mental instability. We have sworn affidavits from Agnes stating that you abandoned the marital home in a fit of rage, endangering your child by taking her out into a blizzard. We will paint a picture of an unfit, destitute mother. No judge will side with you. Signing these documents today protects you from a humiliating public trial." I looked at the lawyer, committing his name and face to memory. He was actively participating in a criminal extortion scheme. He was weaponizing the legal system to facilitate fraud and blackmail. The microphone tucked inside my coat was capturing every single highly illegal threat spilling from his mouth. I let the silence stretch, allowing their arrogance to swell and fill the room. They truly believed they had completely checkmated me. I looked down at the quitclaim deed again. The irony of the document was absolutely staggering. Harrison was demanding that I surrender my ownership rights to a house he did not even know was legally mine. He had hired a bottom-feeder attorney to draft a deed transfer for a property held in a blind trust controlled entirely by my father. The document was not just cruel, it was legally worthless. It was a piece of garbage printed on expensive paper. But I could not reveal that yet. I needed them to commit fully to their extortion plot. I needed them to explicitly tie the signing of these fraudulent documents to the safety of my mother's heirlooms and my daughter's custody. Agnes grew impatient with my silence. She walked over to the fireplace and placed her hand directly on the cedar box. Her manicured fingers drummed a threatening rhythm against the old wood. "We do not have all day, Clara," she warned, her voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "The fire is very hot. It would be a terrible shame if this box accidentally slipped off the mantel. Just pick up the pen and sign your name. Do the right thing for once in your miserable life, and let my son move on." They had built a perfect trap. They had assembled every element required to force a desperate mother into submission. But I was not a desperate mother. I was a trap designed to catch them. Harrison took a step forward, breaking the silence that hung heavily in the living room. His handsome features contorted into an ugly mask of pure arrogance. He pointed a finger directly at my face, launching into a vicious tirade designed to break my spirit entirely. "You really need to understand your position right now, Clara," he spat, his voice dripping with condescension. "You have absolutely nothing. I checked the accounts. You have no money. You have no job that pays enough to fight me. You are a broke, unemployed failure standing in my beautiful house wearing a wet coat. If you do not sign those papers immediately, I will completely destroy you. I will go to a judge and I will tell them you are severely mentally ill. I will swear under oath that you had a psychotic break on Christmas Eve and ran out into a blizzard, putting our child in mortal danger." Agnes immediately stepped away from the fireplace to flank him, backing up his horrific threats with her own brand of cruelty. "We have already laid the groundwork, Clara," she chimed in, her eyes gleaming with malice. "Everyone in the family knows you lost your mind. My friends know. Harrison's investors know. You are entirely isolated. When we get to family court, we will paint such a devastating picture of your incompetence that the judge will practically beg us to take Lily away from you permanently. You will be branded as a homeless, hysterical hazard to your own daughter. You will never see her again." The lawyer shifted in his seat, leaning forward to add a veneer of legal authority to their blackmail. "It is a very simple choice," he added, adjusting his cheap tie. "My client is offering you a $5,000 payout. It is a meager sum, but it is more than a mentally unstable homeless woman deserves. If you refuse this generous offer, the litigation will bleed you dry. We will subpoena your employer. We will drag your name through the mud until no reputable accounting firm ever hires you again. Just sign the deed and the custody agreement. Save yourself the absolute devastation." Brittany could not resist joining the attack. She sat up slightly on the leather sofa, swirling the champagne in my favorite mug. "You really should listen to them, Clara," she advised with a fake pout. "Harrison is a very powerful man now. You cannot fight a future chief executive officer. Lily needs a stable environment with successful parents who can give her the world. You cannot even give her a warm room tonight. Just sign the papers and go find a little studio apartment somewhere far away from us." I remained completely silent. I did not flinch. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice to defend myself. I just stood there perfectly still, keeping my breathing even and my face entirely blank. Inside my mind, however, the forensic accountant was operating at maximum capacity. My internal monologue was a rapid-fire stream of legal analysis and tactical calculations, Every single word they uttered was being captured by the high-definition microphone concealed inside my winter coat. I was letting them talk. I was encouraging them to fill the silence with their own destruction. Under state and federal law, they were actively conspiring to commit criminal extortion and blackmail. They were explicitly conditioning a financial payout on the surrender of property and parental rights under the threat of fabricated legal action and public defamation. It was a textbook felony. Harrison mistook my silence for submission. He took another step closer, invading my personal space, trying to use his physical size to intimidate me. "Do you hear me, Clara?" He growled, his breath hot against my face. "You are absolutely powerless. You are nobody. I hold the purse strings. I hold the power. I have the entire corporate world eating out of the palm of my hand. I am going to crush you so completely that you will wish you had frozen to death in that storm. Sign the damn papers." I kept my eyes locked onto his. I did not blink. I was cataloging the precise phrasing of his threats. He was establishing premeditation and malicious intent right on tape. He was admitting to a coordinated campaign of gaslighting and psychological abuse. The more he spoke, the tighter the noose became around his own neck. He was handing me a federal case wrapped in a neat little bow. Agnes grew frustrated by my absolute lack of reaction. She hated that I was not breaking down and weeping at her feet. She turned back to the stone mantel and violently grabbed my late mother's cedar box. She held it directly over the roaring flames. "Are you deaf as well as stupid?" Agnes shrieked, her voice echoing off the high ceiling. "I will burn these pathetic memories right now. I will drop this box into the fire and watch your mother's legacy turn to ash. Sign the documents, Clara. Take the $5,000 and leave my son alone." The threat against my mother's heirlooms sent a spike of adrenaline through my veins, but I forcefully pushed it down. I needed them to finalize the transaction. I needed the lawyer to confirm his complicity. So just to be absolutely clear, I finally spoke, my voice echoing with a chilling, icy calmness. "You are demanding that I surrender my legal rights to this house and hand over full custody of my daughter. In exchange, you will give me $5,000 and return my stolen property. If I refuse, you will intentionally destroy my reputation, commit perjury in family court, and burn my mother's irreplaceable keepsakes." "Exactly," Harrison spat, crossing his arms. "That is the deal." The lawyer nodded, sweating profusely. "It is a binding settlement offer," he confirmed nervously, entirely unaware that he had just confessed to facilitating a felony on a digital recording. I looked at the stack of fraudulent documents sitting on the glass table. I looked at the cheap pen resting beside them. I looked at Brittany lounging on my sofa wearing a stolen family heirloom around her neck. Then I looked at Agnes holding the cedar box over the flames, her face twisted with bitter hatred. Finally, my gaze returned to Harrison, the man who had promised to love and protect me, standing there demanding my total ruin. They had built their entire criminal extortion case perfectly. They had provided motive, means, and opportunity. They had confirmed their conspiracy and explicitly detailed their malicious intentions. My hidden microphone had captured every single agonizing second of their psychological warfare. The trap had successfully closed around them. I stepped forward, leaving the cheap plastic pen completely untouched on the glass table. I looked Harrison dead in the eye, my gaze unwavering and completely devoid of fear. "I am not signing a single page of your delusional demands," I stated, my voice cutting through the heavy tension in the room. "I will never surrender my daughter to a man who uses her health as a bargaining chip, and I will certainly not hand over a house to someone who cannot even afford his own lifestyle." Harrison blinked, stepping back as if I had physically struck him. His arrogant smirk vanished instantly, replaced by genuine shock. He had fully expected me to crumble under their coordinated psychological assault. Agnes let out a furious, piercing scream. Her face flushed a deep, mottled red as she realized her intimidation tactics had completely failed. "You ungrateful, wretched girl!" she shrieked, raising her arms. She violently swung the cedar box toward the roaring flames of the fireplace, intending to destroy my mother's memory right in front of me. She severely underestimated my reflexes. I lunged forward with explosive speed, intercepting her motion before the wooden box could even breach the hearth. I snatched the heavy cedar heirloom right out of her manicured hands. I spun around and slammed my free hand hard against the stone mantel, cornering Agnes. I leaned in close, fixing her with a fierce, terrifying glare that radiated pure, unadulterated menace. "If you ever attempt to touch my family's property again," I whispered, my tone so dark and venomous that Agnes physically recoiled, trembling against the stone bricks. "I will make sure you spend your retirement rotting in a federal prison cell. Do not ever test me, Agnes." Agnes froze, completely paralyzed by the sudden, overwhelming shift in my demeanor. The fragile, helpless daughter-in-law she thought she could bully was completely gone. I turned my back on the terrified older woman and directed my absolute focus to the sweaty man sitting nervously on the sofa. "Mr. Vance," I said, adjusting my grip on the cedar box. "As a practicing attorney in the state of Illinois, you should be acutely aware that facilitating criminal extortion and participating in a coordinated blackmail scheme are highly disparable offenses. You just spent the last 10 minutes explicitly outlining a conspiracy to commit perjury and fraud against a mother and child." The cheap lawyer physically shrank back into the leather cushions. He shifted uncomfortably, pulling at his tight collar as a thick bead of sweat rolled down his forehead. He glanced nervously at Harrison, suddenly realizing a massive, catastrophic error had been made. I was not the weak, hysterical woman Harrison had promised him. I was calculating, highly intelligent, and entirely unintimidated by his empty legal threats. Mr. Vance hastily began shoving his files back into his battered briefcase, avoiding my piercing gaze entirely. He knew he had just walked blindly into a terrifying legal minefield, and his career was now at risk. I turned my attention away from the panicking attorney and looked one last time at the man I had married. Harrison was standing frozen in the center of the room, his fists clenched at his sides. He had completely lost control of the narrative, and his silence proved it. I adjusted my grip on my mother's heavy cedar box, holding it securely against my hip. I took a slow, deliberate breath and began to walk toward the grand foyer. My footsteps echoed sharply against the hardwood floor, signaling the absolute end of my presence in their toxic world. But as I passed the custom leather sofa, my momentum came to an abrupt halt. I stopped directly in front of Brittany. The young marketing assistant was still lounging horizontally, but her previously smug expression had completely vanished. She sat up rigidly, clutching my ceramic coffee mug to her chest, as if it could somehow protect her from the fierce energy I was radiating. However, my eyes were not focused on the stolen mug or her nervous face. My gaze dropped slightly, landing directly on the base of her neck. Resting against her collarbone, catching the warm light of the flickering fireplace, was a stunning vintage diamond necklace. My heart skipped a sudden, violent beat. I recognized the intricate platinum setting and the teardrop diamond instantly. It was not a cheap trinket purchased from a department store window. It was a priceless family heirloom that had belonged to my late grandmother. It was a piece of my heritage that I kept carefully stored in a velvet box hidden at the very back of my top dresser drawer. Harrison had actually invaded my private space, rummaged through my personal belongings, and stolen a sacred family heirloom just to drape it around the neck of his clueless subordinate. The sheer audacity of his theft eradicated any remaining shred of humanity I felt toward him. I did not yell. I did not ask for permission. I moved with the swift, terrifying precision of a striking predator. Before Brittany could even register my movement, I reached out and grabbed the platinum chain resting against her skin. My fingers deftly located the antique clasp at the nape of her neck. With one sharp, coordinated twist, I unhooked the necklace and smoothly pulled the shimmering diamonds away from her collarbone. Brittany let out a loud, shocked gasp. Her hands flew up to her empty neck and she fumbled blindly, dropping my ceramic coffee mug onto the thick rug below. "Hey!" she shrieked, her voice pitching into a panicked whine. "Harrison gave that to me. It is mine." I let the heavy diamond pendant drop heavily into the deep pocket of my winter coat, securing it right next to the hidden audio recorder. I looked down at the stunned mistress, my expression radiating pure, absolute zero temperatures. "You can have my husband's trash." I said, my voice slicing through the room like a perfectly sharpened blade. But keep your hands off my family's jewelry. Harrison suddenly snapped out of his paralyzed stupor. What the hell do you think you are doing, Clara? He bellowed, taking a heavy, aggressive step toward me. Give that back to her right now, or I swear to God I will call the police and have you arrested for robbery. I did not even bother turning around to face him. Call them, I challenged loudly as I continued walking straight toward the heavy oak front door. Tell the police exactly how you managed to purchase a vintage heirloom that has been in my family for 3 generations. I am sure the responding officers will be fascinated to hear your explanation. I reached the entryway and grabbed the brass handle of the front door. I pulled it open, allowing the freezing Chicago wind to instantly rush into the overheated mansion. The biting cold felt incredibly refreshing against my flushed skin. I stepped out onto the snowy porch and began walking down the icy front steps. Harrison marched aggressively out the door right behind me, closely followed by Agnes, who was still screaming incoherent insults into the freezing wind. They thought they could intimidate me one last time by chasing me off the property. Their aggressive pursuit came to a sudden, catastrophic halt the second I reached the bottom of the driveway. Idling quietly at the curb were 2 massive black armored SUVs. The engines hummed with quiet, raw power, cutting through the silence of the snow-covered street. As I approached, the tinted doors swung open simultaneously. 4 towering men dressed in sharp, dark suits stepped out onto the icy pavement. This was William's private elite security detail. They stood in perfect formation, their postures rigid, and their hands resting casually near their holsters, forming an impenetrable human wall between me and my furious husband. Harrison stopped dead in his tracks on the snowy walkway, his aggressive stride failing instantly. The color completely drained from his face as he realized he was entirely outmatched. He was no longer dealing with a helpless, isolated wife. He was looking directly at the overwhelming physical force of my father's immense wealth and power. Agnes stood shivering on the top step, her mouth hanging open in sheer terror as she stared at the heavily armed security team. All her previous arrogance evaporated into the freezing winter air, leaving her looking small, pathetic, and utterly powerless. One of the security agents respectfully opened the heavy, reinforced door of the primary SUV for me. I climbed into the warm, luxurious interior, placing my mother's cedar box gently onto the leather seat beside me. I reached into my coat pocket, feeling the cold diamonds of my grandmother's necklace resting perfectly against the smooth metallic casing of my digital audio recorder. I had exactly what I came for. The trap had worked flawlessly. I looked out the tinted window one final time, watching Harrison and Agnes standing helplessly in the freezing snow as my driver pulled smoothly away from the curb. They thought they had won the battle today. They had no idea I was about to annihilate them in the war. I leaned back into the comfortable leather seat and closed my eyes, preparing myself for the absolute devastation I was going to unleash at their glamorous New Year's Eve gala. 5 days later, the Lincoln Park estate was completely transformed into a blinding spectacle of stolen wealth. It was New Year's Eve, and Harrison was throwing the most lavish, highly publicized gala of the season. Valets rushed to park lines of luxury imported cars, while hired waitstaff in crisp white tuxedos carried silver trays loaded with premium champagne. The sprawling mansion was packed to the absolute brim with Chicago's corporate elite. Harrison had invited his extended family, his firm's powerful board of directors, and a select group of wealthy private investors he desperately needed to impress. The atmosphere was electric, buzzing with the loud, confident chatter of high society. Agnes was in her absolute element, treating the gala like her own personal coronation. Wearing a flashy sequined gown, she glided through the crowded ballroom with Brittany glued to her side. I knew exactly what was happening inside those walls because Jasmine was providing me with constant live updates via text message from the back of the room. Jasmine and Trent stood quietly near the bar, watching the horrific performance unfold while waiting for my signal. According to Jasmine, Agnes was aggressively working the room, weaving her toxic, fabricated narrative to anyone who would listen. She cornered the senior partners and the financial backers, whispering vicious lies about my supposed mental collapse. She leaned in close, claiming with fake tears in her eyes that I had completely lost my mind on Christmas Eve. She told them I had violently abandoned my husband and infant daughter to run off with a mysterious lover, leaving Harrison entirely devastated. She painted her son as a tragic, heroic figure, bravely holding his family together despite his wicked, insane wife. And of course, she proudly presented Brittany as the brilliant, supportive savior who stepped in to mend his broken heart. Harrison soaked up the sympathetic applause and the admiring glances from his colleagues. He wore a custom-tailored tuxedo, undoubtedly purchased with stolen funds from his clients. He mingled effortlessly, exuding the fake, unearned confidence of a man who genuinely believed his own massive lies. He thought he had completely won. He thought his perfect illusion was impenetrable. As midnight rapidly approached, the hired string quartet stopped playing their classical music. Harrison confidently walked to the center of the grand mahogany staircase, grabbing a crystal champagne flute from a passing waiter. He pulled a silver spoon from his pocket and tapped it sharply against the delicate glass. The loud, ringing sound cut instantly through the ambient chatter, commanding the immediate attention of every single guest. The massive ballroom fell completely silent as hundreds of eyes turned to the man of the hour. "Thank you all for joining us tonight." Harrison began, his voice booming with arrogant authority over the sophisticated sound system. As we prepare to ring in the new year, I want to take a moment to reflect on the incredible journey that brought us here to this magnificent home. It has been a year of massive professional growth and intense personal challenges. As many of you know, I have recently navigated a highly difficult transition in my private life. But through sheer resilience and an unwavering commitment to excellence, I have emerged stronger and more focused than ever before. He paused dramatically, letting the fake sympathy wash over the captivated crowd. He looked directly at the wealthy board of directors standing near the roaring fireplace. "This coming year represents the absolute pinnacle of my career," he continued, smoothly adjusting his expensive silk tie. "I am deeply honored to be officially stepping into the role of Chief Executive Officer. I promise to lead this firm with the exact same financial acumen, flawless strategy, and uncompromising integrity that allowed me to build my own personal success. We are going to secure unprecedented investments and reach staggering new heights together." Harrison then turned his affectionate gaze to Brittany, who was beaming proudly from the bottom step. Her neck was conspicuously bare, since I had reclaimed my grandmother's diamonds, but she still radiated smug triumph. "But a man cannot reach the top of the mountain alone," Harrison declared, placing a hand dramatically over his heart. He reached down and pulled Brittany up onto the step beside him, wrapping his arm around her waist. "I want to publicly thank the absolute love of my life, Brittany. When my world was unexpectedly falling apart, she was my anchor. She represents the bright, beautiful future I am building. She is my true partner in every sense of the word." Harrison raised his crystal glass high into the air, a smug, triumphant smile plastered across his handsome face. He was standing in my father's house, drinking champagne bought with my daughter's stolen college fund, and demanding applause for a corporate empire he had secretly robbed. "To new beginnings," he announced loudly, preparing to deliver his final arrogant toast to the crowd. "To unmatched wealth, to corporate success, and to leaving the dead weight of the past exactly where it belongs." Before Harrison could even bring the crystal glass to his lips, the massive, heavy oak front doors of the mansion violently swung open. The loud, booming sound of the solid wood hitting the interior walls echoed like a gunshot through the cavernous foyer, instantly cutting off the polite applause of the crowd. The ambient background music abruptly ceased as the hired string quartet froze in their seats. Hundreds of wealthy guests turned around simultaneously, their champagne glasses halted mid-air. The entire ballroom fell completely dead silent. I stepped over the threshold and walked straight into the blinding light of the crystal chandeliers. I was not wearing a cheap sweater or looking like a broken, abandoned wife. I was dressed flawlessly in a sharp, tailored emerald green pantsuit that radiated absolute power and uncompromising authority. My hair was perfectly styled, and my makeup concealed any trace of the tears I had shed days ago. My heels clicked sharply against the polished marble floor, announcing my arrival with deafening clarity. I did not come alone. Flanking me on my right was my father William, his expression colder than the freezing snow outside. Behind us marched a highly intimidating team of top-tier corporate litigators, clutching thick leather briefcases filled with irrefutable evidence. Completing our formidable formation were two hardened plainclothes police detectives, their gold badges clearly visible on their belts. The color completely drained from Harrison's face as he stood paralyzed on the mahogany staircase, his raised glass trembling violently in his hand. Brittany let out a sharp gasp and instinctively stepped behind him, desperately trying to hide from my piercing gaze. Agnes, however, reacted with pure explosive panic. Her sequined gown flashed under the chandelier lights as she aggressively charged forward, pushing her way through the stunned crowd of elite investors. She pointed a shaking manicured finger directly at my face, her features contorted with absolute fury and blind desperation. "How dare you show your face here?" Agnes screamed, her shrill voice echoing terribly across the silent ballroom. "You are trespassing, Clara. You have absolutely no right to be inside this home. Security, get over here right now and remove this insane woman before I personally call the police and have her arrested for breaking and entering." The wealthy guests gasped, exchanging horrified whispers as they witnessed the ugly reality of Harrison's family dynamic spilling out into the open. Harrison frantically gestured for his hired guards to intervene, but the men in black suits remained completely motionless at the edges of the room. They had already been briefed and neutralized by my father's security detail outside. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice or react to her frantic screaming. I simply looked at Agnes with a calm, chilling smile that made her physically recoil. I did not say a single word to the panicking woman. I merely took one graceful step to the side, yielding the center of the grand foyer. I turned my head and gave a slight deferential nod, allowing my father William to step forward and officially take the floor. William walked past Agnes as if she were completely invisible. He moved with the terrifying calm of a predator who had finally cornered his prey. He ascended the first few steps of the grand mahogany staircase and stopped directly in front of my husband. Harrison stood frozen with fear as William forcefully shoved a thick legal folder right into his chest. Harrison fumbled with his crystal champagne flute, spilling the expensive drink down his custom-tailored tuxedo to catch the heavy documents. I calmly walked up the stairs right behind my father. I reached out and firmly pulled the microphone directly from Harrison's shaking hand. The screech of audio feedback briefly echoed through the massive ballroom, making several wealthy investors wince. I looked out at the sea of elite corporate executives and board members who had just been applauding this man. "I apologize for interrupting the celebration," I announced, my voice ringing with absolute crystal clarity over the sound system. But since Harrison was just speaking about uncompromised integrity and massive financial success, I felt it was only right to ensure his investors knew the actual truth about his assets. I paused, letting the heavy silence amplify the tension in the room. "My husband does not own this estate," I declared loudly. "He never has. He is standing in a house that does not belong to him, claiming a level of wealth he has never achieved." The crowd erupted into loud gasps and hurried whispers. Harrison turned completely pale, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocated fish. He desperately opened the legal folder my father had shoved into his chest. William turned to face the shocked crowd of corporate elites. 3 years ago, Harrison was facing total bankruptcy and absolute credit ruin. My father stated, his powerful voice requiring no microphone to command the room. "To save my daughter from his financial incompetence, I secretly purchased this property in full. I placed the deed entirely under a blind trust. Harrison has been playing the role of a wealthy real estate owner, but he is legally nothing more than a temporary tenant." I looked directly at Harrison and delivered the fatal blow. "As the sole legal owners of this property, we are executing an immediate eviction," I announced cleanly and ruthlessly into the microphone. "You have exactly 30 minutes to vacate my house." "This is a lie," Harrison stammered wildly, his voice cracking as panic totally consumed him. He pointed a shaking finger at me. I paid the mortgage every single month. I have the bank receipts to prove it. I smiled a completely freezing, unapologetic smile. You were paying rent, Harrison, I countered coldly. My father let you believe it was a mortgage to protect your fragile ego. And since you completely drained your accounts to buy Brittany a sports car, you failed to make this month's payment. You are officially in default. At the bottom of the stairs, Agnes let out a guttural sound of pure horror. The reality of the situation crashed over her with devastating force. The luxurious mansion she had paraded around in the grand life she had bragged about to her social circle was entirely gone. She looked around at the cold, judging faces of the elite guests, and suddenly realized she had no money, no property, and nowhere to go. She was about to be entirely homeless on a freezing New Year's Eve, and there was absolutely nothing she could do to stop it. I did not give Agnes another single second of my attention. I turned my gaze back to the terrified man standing beside me on the grand mahogany staircase. Harrison thought losing his fake mansion was the ultimate punishment, but I had not even begun to dismantle his actual life yet. I raised my left hand and gave a sharp, definitive nod to the team of corporate litigators standing by the grand entrance. One of William's top attorneys tapped a command into a sleek handheld tablet. Instantly, the massive high-definition projector screen suspended above the ballroom flickered and went entirely black. The soft romantic background music that had just resumed playing completely cut out. The screen was supposed to display a carefully curated slideshow of Harrison and Brittany posing in exotic locations, smiling brightly and drinking expensive champagne. He had planned to use those images to solidify his perfect public image before claiming his new corporate title. Instead, the enormous display violently flared back to life, illuminating the dark ballroom with a stark glaring white light. Massive detailed spreadsheets, complex banking routing numbers, and highly classified internal corporate ledgers filled the enormous screen. Bright red highlighted text flashed aggressively across the display, drawing every single eye in the crowded room. The polite murmurs of the wealthy guests completely died down, replaced by an electric, terrifying tension. The entire gala held its breath, staring up at the overwhelming wall of financial data. I gripped the microphone tightly, stepping forward so I was looking directly at the senior partners and private investors standing near the center of the room. You see, Harrison did not just lie to me about his personal finances, I announced, my voice echoing powerfully off the marble walls. He lied to every single person standing in this room tonight. He built his entire illusion of wealth using other people's money. And as a licensed forensic accountant, I decided to spend my holiday weekend tracking exactly where that money came from. I clicked a small presentation remote in my hand, advancing the massive screen to the next slide. A complex visual flowchart appeared, mapping out hundreds of illicit transactions originating directly from the firm's top-tier client accounts. I asked the board of directors to pay very close attention to these specific routing numbers I instructed, pointing a laser straight at the screen. Over the past 2 years, Harrison has systematically siphoned over $4 million from your elite investment portfolios. The crowd let out a collective gasp of pure horror. Harrison lunged forward desperately, trying to snatch the microphone from my hand, but my father's elite security team instantly intercepted him. 2 massive guards pinned his arms firmly behind his back, holding him completely immobilized on the stairs. He thrashed wildly, screaming that the documents were entirely fabricated, that I was just a crazy, jealous wife trying to ruin his life because he was leaving me. I completely ignored his pathetic screaming and pressed another button on the remote. I walked the horrified investors through the brutal mechanics of his crime step by agonizing step. I explained exactly how he disguised the massive theft as external corporate consulting fees and administrative market adjustments. I switched the slide to reveal the 3 dummy shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands. These corporate entities do not actually exist, I stated coldly, projecting my voice over Harrison's frantic denials. They have no employees, no services, and no actual operations. They are simply offshore washing machines designed to funnel your stolen investment capital directly into his private domestic checking accounts. I showed them the forged executive board signatures and the fabricated service contracts he used to bypass internal audits. To eliminate any shadow of a doubt, I advanced the presentation to the final undeniable slide. The screen shifted to display high-resolution scans of internal corporate memos signed directly by Harrison right alongside bank transfer receipts that perfectly matched his personal, luxurious spending habits. I pulled up the exact digital receipt for the brand-new custom-ordered sports car sitting in the circular driveway outside. This luxury vehicle was purchased just 3 days ago, I informed the outraged crowd, looking directly at Brittany, who shrank back in absolute terror against the banister. It was funded by completely liquidating my infant daughter's college trust fund and supplementing the rest of the purchase price with your stolen corporate capital. He robbed your pension funds to buy diamond necklaces and designer suits so he could pretend to belong in your world. The reaction from the wealthy crowd was instantaneous and violently explosive. The polite, sophisticated atmosphere of the gala completely evaporated, replaced by raw, unadulterated fury. Elite investors began shouting angrily, demanding immediate answers and pushing their way toward the staircase. Several high-profile clients pulled out their cell phones frantically, calling their personal lawyers and financial advisors to lock down their remaining assets. The room descended into absolute chaos as the horrifying realization of their stolen wealth hit them like a physical blow. A tall, distinguished man with silver hair pushed his way to the very front of the furious crowd. It was Chairman Davis, the most senior partner of Harrison's firm. His face was purple with uncontained rage. He looked from the highly detailed forensic audit glowing on the screen directly to the sweating, panicking man being held securely by my father's guards. Harrison, I demand a full explanation. Right this second. Chairman Davis roared, his voice shaking with absolute furious authority. Are you telling me you stole millions of dollars from our most valued partners to fund your pathetic personal lifestyle? Harrison stammered incoherently, tears of pure panic streaming down his flushed face. He desperately tried to claim it was a massive misunderstanding, a temporary market loan he fully planned to repay before the quarterly audit. But his pathetic lies withered instantly under the glaring, irrefutable evidence displayed brightly above his head. The numbers simply did not lie, and everyone in the room knew it. Chairman Davis did not wait for him to finish a single coherent sentence. You are entirely finished, Harrison, he barked loudly, ensuring the entire furious ballroom heard his final verdict. Your upcoming promotion to Chief Executive Officer is officially revoked, effective immediately. You are terminated from this firm without severance, and our corporate lawyers will be legally seizing every single asset you possess by tomorrow morning. We will see you in federal court. Harrison's knees completely gave out. He slumped forward against the grip of the security guards, a thoroughly broken and ruined man. The glittering corporate empire he had built on a dark foundation of massive lies had been completely annihilated in less than 10 minutes. The prestigious promotion, the unearned wealth, and the fake social status all vanished into thin air. I stood tall above him, holding the microphone, looking down at the absolute wreckage of his life. The financial execution was totally complete. The sheer weight of the absolute silence that followed Chairman Davis's declaration was deafening. Every eye in the grand ballroom remained fixed on the pathetic, sweating man pinned against the mahogany banister. Brittany, who had been cowering behind Harrison, finally processed the catastrophic reality of her situation. The luxurious mansion she thought she was moving into belonged to me. The sports car she drove here was purchased with stolen funds and would be repossessed by morning. The wealthy, powerful executive she thought she had seduced was actually a broke federal criminal facing decades behind bars. I watched Brittany's eyes dart frantically around the room, absorbing the pure, unadulterated disgust radiating from the elite guests. She looked down at her left hand, where a massive diamond engagement ring glittered under the chandeliers. I knew Harrison had purchased it using the embezzled corporate funds. Brittany realized she had tied herself to a sinking ship, and if she did not jump immediately, she would be dragged straight down to the bottom with him. Brittany grabbed the diamond ring and aggressively yanked it off her finger. The metal scraped harshly against her skin, leaving a bright red mark. She marched right up to Harrison, her face contorted with a mixture of profound betrayal and extreme embarrassment. You completely lied to me, she shrieked, her high-pitched voice echoing through the silent foyer. You told me you were a millionaire. You are nothing but a broke, pathetic loser. Before Harrison could even open his mouth to formulate a pathetic excuse, Brittany raised her hand and delivered a vicious, echoing slap directly across his cheek. The sharp crack resounded perfectly in the quiet room, causing several wealthy investors to flinch. Brittany did not wait to see the red handprint blossoming on his face. She spun around on her expensive heels, threw the stolen engagement ring violently onto the marble floor, and sprinted desperately toward the front doors. She grabbed her winter coat from the panicked coat check attendant and fled the mansion, abandoning Harrison entirely. The diamond ring rolled across the polished floor, eventually coming to a complete stop right at the toes of my emerald green shoes. I calmly stepped over the discarded jewelry. I turned my attention to the two plainclothes police detectives who had been standing patiently by my father's side, observing the entire spectacle. They stepped forward in absolute unison, their expressions hard and utterly professional. They approached the staircase and signaled for my father's security guards to release Harrison's arms. The moment the guard stepped back, the taller detective roughly grabbed Harrison's wrist and violently twisted his hands behind his back. "Harrison Sterling, you are under arrest," the detective announced, his authoritative voice cutting through the remaining whispers of the crowd. "You are being charged with multiple counts of corporate fraud, grand larceny, and money laundering. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The heavy metallic click of the steel handcuffs locking around Harrison's wrists was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard in my entire life. The man who had confidently demanded that I sign away my child and my dignity just hours prior was now publicly shackled in front of his entire professional network. He sobbed openly, begging his former colleagues for legal help, pleading with Chairman Davis to let him explain. The investors simply turned their backs in absolute disgust, refusing to even look at the crying criminal being forcefully escorted down the stairs. The detectives marched Harrison right out the front doors, shoving him into the back of a waiting, unmarked police cruiser. As the red and blue police lights flashed brightly through the grand bay windows, a new sound of sheer panic erupted near the bar. Agnes was hyperventilating, her sequined dress practically vibrating as the full weight of her total destruction finally hit her. Her golden boy was headed to a federal penitentiary. Her fake high society lifestyle was completely obliterated, and the 30-minute eviction timer I had set was rapidly expiring. Agnes looked wildly around the room, searching for anyone who might offer her salvation. The elite guests actively stepped away from her, treating her like a highly infectious disease. Desperation completely consumed her. She spotted her older son Trent standing quietly near the corner with Jasmine, his brilliant corporate lawyer wife. Agnes practically sprinted across the ballroom, her high heels slipping clumsily on the polished marble. "Trent, you have to help me!" Agnes wailed aggressively, grabbing her son's tuxedo sleeve. "Your brother is ruined. Clara has completely lost her mind. She is trying to throw me out into the street. You have to let me come home with you tonight. I need a place to stay until we can fix this massive misunderstanding." Trent looked at the woman who had spent his entire life casting him aside in favor of his younger brother. He gently but firmly pried her desperate clawing fingers off his arm and took a deliberate step backward, establishing an undeniable physical boundary. He did not say a single word of comfort. He simply looked at his wife, yielding the floor to the woman his mother had systematically disrespected for years. Jasmine stepped smoothly between Trent and Agnes. She looked absolutely radiant, standing tall and completely unbothered by the frantic, hysterical older woman weeping in front of her. Agnes looked at Jasmine with wide, begging eyes, desperately hoping for an ounce of the familial loyalty she had never once earned. Jasmine looked Agnes up and down with absolute sub-zero ice in her dark eyes. Her voice was incredibly calm, perfectly leveled, and devastatingly sharp. "We don't have enough space for people who throw babies into the snow," she replied. The words struck Agnes like a physical blow to the chest. She gasped, stumbling backward as if all the oxygen had been instantly sucked out of the enormous room. Jasmine simply turned her back on her mother-in-law, linking her arm affectionately through Trent's and calmly walking toward the exit to enjoy the rest of their New Year's Eve. My father's security team stepped forward, checking their watches. "Time is up," the lead guard announced sternly, pointing directly toward the heavy oak doors. Agnes realized she had entirely run out of options. She let out a loud, pathetic wail and scrambled frantically up the stairs to the master bedroom. She furiously shoved her expensive designer dresses and expensive perfumes into random garbage bags and 2 rolling suitcases, weeping hysterically the entire time. When she dragged her heavy luggage back down the grand staircase, the ballroom was almost entirely empty. The investors and board members had all quickly departed, leaving only my security team waiting to enforce her immediate exile. The guards escorted her forcefully toward the entryway. Agnes turned around at the threshold, tears ruining her expensive makeup, shivering violently in her thin sequined gown. She looked at me, standing triumphantly in the center of the warm, beautifully lit foyer, safely surrounded by my father and his highly capable legal team. She opened her mouth to hurl one last venomous insult to demand some shred of unearned pity, but the cold, unyielding expression on my face instantly silenced her. I reached out and grabbed the heavy brass handles of the double doors. "Happy New Year, Agnes," I said softly. I slammed the heavy oak doors shut, locking the deadbolt with a loud, definitive click. Agnes was left dragging her heavy suitcases through the thick, icy slush out into the freezing, brutal Chicago night, entirely abandoned by everyone in her family. The grand house fell beautifully, perfectly silent. 6 months have passed since that perfectly silent night. The transition from the chaotic, freezing winter storm to the bright warmth of the Chicago summer perfectly mirrors the complete transformation of my entire existence. The grand house in Lincoln Park finally belongs entirely to me, not just on a legal property deed, but in spirit and energy. Harrison is currently residing in a maximum security federal penitentiary facility located hundreds of miles away from the luxurious corporate world he so desperately tried to conquer. The federal prosecutors absolutely refuse to offer him any type of lenient plea deal. My comprehensive forensic audit provided an absolute mountain of irrefutable, highly documented evidence. During his highly publicized criminal trial, he attempted to play the victim one final time, but the judge was completely disgusted by his actions. He was found guilty of massive corporate fraud, grand larceny, and extensive international money laundering. He was sentenced to 20 years behind bars without the possibility of early parole. The board of directors aggressively pursued civil litigation and successfully stripped him of every single asset he had left, including his expensive tailored wardrobe and his depleted private bank accounts, to repay a tiny fraction of what he stole. He wears a scratchy standard-issue orange prison jumpsuit now. He has absolutely no power, no prestige, and no elite audience left to manipulate. He is exactly where he belongs, serving time in a cold, concrete cell. Agnes faced a similarly devastating and entirely permanent reality. Stripped of her golden boy and entirely cut off by her extended family, she was forcefully evicted from her temporary hotel and had to move into a cramped, low-income apartment complex on the industrial outskirts of the city. She currently has absolutely no money to fund her previous high society aesthetic or her expensive country club memberships. She spends her days sitting completely alone in a tiny UN air-conditioned living room, staring at peeling yellow wallpaper and listening to the loud traffic outside her thin windows. No one calls her. No one visits her. She tried reaching out to Trent and Jasmine a few months ago, leaving desperate voicemails begging for financial assistance or a place to stay. Jasmine simply blocked her number and reported the harassment to her law firm. Agnes built her entire identity on superficial judgments and extreme cruelty, and now she gets to spend her remaining years completely isolated in the bitter, lonely reality she created for herself. The family court proceedings regarding my daughter were remarkably swift and entirely one-sided. thanks to the digital audio recording of Harrison and Agnes explicitly threatening my life and demanding I surrender my parental rights under criminal duress. The judge granted me full, undisputed sole legal and physical custody of Lily. Harrison was stripped of all parental rights and granted zero visitation. My father, William, true to his fiercely protective nature, personally stepped in to fully restore Lily's college trust fund. He deposited the exact amount Harrison had stolen, ensuring her educational future was completely secured and entirely untouchable. Lily is thriving now, running around the sprawling green gardens of the Lincoln Park estate with a bright, joyful laugh that fills every single room of our home. I did not just survive the brutal betrayal I experienced. I weaponized my trauma to build an entirely new empire of my own. I officially launched a highly specialized forensic accounting firm located right in the heart of downtown Chicago. I specifically designed my corporate agency to help vulnerable women navigate high-stakes divorces against manipulative, wealthy men who think they can hide their money. When a terrified mother walks into my office claiming her powerful husband is hiding assets or threatening to leave her destitute, I know exactly how to dismantle his financial illusions. I meticulously track hidden offshore accounts, uncover dummy corporations, and tear down their paper empires brick by brick, using the exact same skills I used to destroy Harrison. My firm has become wildly successful, and I have earned a fierce reputation as the absolute last person a cheating, abusive husband ever wants to see, sitting on the opposite side of a legal mediation table. I give women the power to fight back with undeniable data. The massive brick home in Lincoln Park no longer feels like a cold fortress of lies and deception. It is filled with genuine warmth and the sound of people who actually love and protect each other unconditionally. I regularly host large, loud family dinners every single Sunday evening in our grand dining room. My father, William, sits proudly at the head of the long mahogany table, holding little Lily in his lap and sharing brilliant business strategies with the room. Jasmine and Trent are always there, bringing incredible food and loud, joyful laughter that echoes through the halls. Jasmine has become the fierce, loyal sister I always needed. As an incredibly successful African-American corporate attorney, she frequently collaborates with my accounting firm to secure massive legal victories for our clients. We are a beautifully unconventional, highly protective family unit, forged in the fires of absolute adversity and unbreakable trust. Looking back on that horrific Christmas Eve, I realized that sometimes the universe has to violently force you out of your comfort zone to save your life. Sometimes being pushed out into the bitter, freezing cold is the absolute only way to finally realize you were actually living inside a burning house. I could have easily signed away my child and accepted the miserable, pathetic crumbs they offered me. But I chose to fight back with cold, calculating precision and pursue absolute legal destruction. Never underestimate a woman who knows how to stay silent and read a spreadsheet. Have you ever discovered a devastating secret that someone tried to hide from you? Share your story in the comments below. And if my journey resonated with you, don't forget to like and subscribe. The most profound takeaway from Clara's harrowing journey is the incredible power of emotional restraint combined with tactical intelligence. When faced with unimaginable betrayal, being thrown into a literal and metaphorical blizzard, while her child's future was actively being dismantled, her initial human instinct could have been to scream, beg, or fight back impulsively. Instead, Clara brilliantly demonstrates that the loudest, most immediate reaction is rarely the most effective one. By remaining completely silent while her oppressors gloated, Clara allowed Harrison and Agnes to become intoxicated by their own unchecked arrogance. They foolishly mistook her composure for weakness, failing to realize that her silence was actually a highly calculated data-gathering mission. This teaches us a vital lesson about navigating toxic environments and profound personal crises. Sometimes the absolute best response to malicious provocation is to simply let the aggressors talk themselves into a corner. Clara's background in forensic accounting wasn't just a professional skill. It was a profound metaphor for looking beneath the superficial lies to find the undeniable objective truth. We often feel immense societal pressure to immediately defend ourselves when we are wrongfully attacked or publicly humiliated. However, Clara's systematic dismantling of Harrison's fraudulent empire reminds us that true lasting justice requires immense patience, strategic planning, and a firm grasp of the facts. She transformed her deepest vulnerability into an impenetrable armor, proving that genuine strength does not roar. It analyzes, it plans, and it executes with absolute precision. By weaponizing her intellect rather than her anger, she ultimately reclaimed her narrative. This story inspires us to cultivate our own hidden competencies and remember that our greatest weapons in life are often a cool head and a sharp mind. Please share your own experiences of turning a moment of extreme adversity into your greatest personal victory in the comments below.